Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal M. I'm glad you're here for another video. If you enjoy the stories, please give the video a like. And if you've had any strange or unexplained experiences yourself, you can send them to me. Tonight, we're starting with a story about two neighbors who decided to sneak out for a short walk while their parents were away. But one of them had a bad feeling, and luckily, they decided to listen to it. So relax, get comfortable, and let's begin. I hope you all have a good night's sleep. I still remember the way Mira looked at me that night. We lived in a quiet set of apartments just outside town, kind of tucked away near the woods. It was the sort of place that felt peaceful during the day, but at night, once the trees turned black and the streets emptied out, it could feel a little too quiet. Mira was my neighbor, and we had this habit of sneaking out whenever our parents weren't home. Nothing wild, honestly. We'd just walk closer to town, talk, maybe hang around near the sports field for a while, then come back before anyone noticed. That night, our parents had gone to an outdoor concert near the harbor. Before leaving, I told my little brother we were just going for a short walk, and then Mira and I headed out like we usually did. But not long after we passed the parking lot of our building, Mira slowed down. She looked at me, kind of unsure, and said, "I don't know how to explain it, but I have a really bad feeling." And when she said it, I believed her. She told me she didn't want to go to the sports field that night, even though that was where we normally ended up. And the thing is, both of us have always taken gut feelings seriously. So I said okay, and we decided to walk another way. At first, we tried to laugh it off. When we had to cut through the wooded path, we kept hearing little noises in the bushes, like something moving just out of sight. We joked that we were only scared because Mira had said the words, "bad feeling," and now our brains were turning every leaf into a horror movie. Still, we both turned on our phone flashlights. The closer we got to town, the more relaxed we felt. There were more houses, more streetlights, and it didn't feel quite so isolated anymore. We were walking through a small neighborhood when we saw a white car in the distance. For a second, we panicked and hid behind a low wall, thinking it might be our parents coming back early. But the car turned into another parking area, so we stepped out again. Then, as soon as we started walking, the car made a U-turn. It stopped, only a few meters away from us. Two people got out, a man and a woman. In the dark, they looked older, maybe middle-aged, maybe more. The man seemed to be searching the road for something, walking around and looking down everywhere. But the woman was the one we couldn't stop staring at. She was furious. Not just irritated, not just arguing. She was screaming at him with this rage that felt completely out of control. Then she yelled something like, "How are the kids supposed to get home with all this mess?" That sentence made my stomach drop. It was around 1 a.m. Nobody was coming to pick up a bunch of kids at that hour. Not in that quiet neighborhood, not near the woods. Something about it felt wrong in a way I still can't fully explain. Then the woman started tearing through the car, opening things, throwing things around. At one point, she grabbed a cardboard box, threw it onto the ground, and started hitting it over and over. She was taking all her anger out on it, violently, like she couldn't stop herself. Mira and I just stood there for a few seconds, frozen. Then we looked at each other, and without even really saying it, we both knew. We had to go home. So we turned around and walked back fast, almost running. Behind us, we could still hear the woman screaming. We could hear banging too, maybe against the car door, maybe something else. Mira and I kept trying to make sense of it while we hurried back. We told ourselves maybe it was a family argument, maybe they had lost something, maybe we were overreacting. But honestly, we were terrified. When we finally got home, we went straight to my little brother. He looked up and said my dad had just texted him. Our parents would be home in 5 minutes. Mira and I just stared at each other. That was the moment it really hit us. If we had ignored her bad feeling, if we had gone to the sports field like usual, our parents would have come home and found out we were gone. And maybe that was all we avoided. Or maybe we avoided something much worse. I still think about that night. The strange noises in the woods, the car turning around, that woman's rage, the way everything seemed to slow us down and push us back home. Since then, Mira and I made a promise. If one of us feels something is wrong, we listen. No debating it, no trying to be brave for no reason, no worrying about ruining the night. Because sometimes your instinct speaks quietly. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you listen before it has to scream. I grew up in a quiet little town with this enormous old park right in the middle of it. Everyone just called it the castle grounds, even though the castle itself was long gone. What stood there instead was an old manor house tucked behind heavy trees and iron fencing. It wasn't falling apart exactly. It still had walls, windows, a roof, all of that. But it had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. When I was young, my nan used to take me walking there. One afternoon, we sat down on a bench facing the manor. I remember it was warm, the kind of summer day where everything feels still. I was staring up at the windows, just letting my eyes wander, when I saw a woman standing behind the glass. She had thick, dark auburn hair, and her clothes looked completely wrong for the weather. She was wearing this long, pale dress, almost like an old nightgown, with ruffles around the sleeves and collar. Then she started to turn. Not like a person turning around on their feet, more like her whole body was slowly rotating in the air. And that was when I understood what I was looking at. She was hanging. The strange thing is, I don't remember feeling scared in the way you'd expect. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just had this sudden, powerful feeling that I was not supposed to be looking at her. Like I had seen something private, something I had no right to witness. After that, every time I passed that house, I made myself look away from the windows. I was terrified I'd see her again. Honestly, I never liked that park much after that. The trees were ancient, the paths were always too quiet, and the whole place had this heavy feeling to it. Even on bright days, it felt like something was sitting there, waiting. For years, nobody really looked into the history of the manor. It was a small town, and places like that just became part of the background. But about 20 years later, people finally started doing proper research into the estate. That was when they found out that several violent deaths had happened there. When I heard that, I felt shocked, of course. But I also felt this strange relief. It was horrible, but it explained something. It made me feel like maybe I hadn't imagined the heaviness of that place after all. Since then, I don't think I've ever seen another figure as clearly as I saw that woman. But I still sense things in certain places. Some buildings feel wrong to me the second I step inside them. And there's something else that happens sometimes. Every now and then, I get this feeling right before something bad happens. I can't explain it properly. It feels like someone has suddenly grabbed me and pushed me underwater for a few seconds. I can breathe, but only barely. I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know who it's connected to, but usually within the next day, something does happen. I never really talked to my parents about any of this. We weren't that kind of family. We didn't sit around sharing deep, strange things, so I kept it to myself. Then, about a year ago, someone in our family passed away, and we all came together to remember him. At some point, the conversation turned toward death, and I finally told my mother about the woman I had seen in the manor window. She looked genuinely shaken. Then she told me something I had never heard before. She said that when I was around 2 years old, I told her that her father had died. Not only that, but I pointed to the exact places on my own body where he had been hurt. I was very close to my grandfather when I was little. We were together constantly, and from what everyone says, he absolutely adored me. After I said those things, my mother went to the local priest because she didn't know what to do with it. She wanted guidance, I think. Reassurance, maybe. But she said he was cold about it. Harsh, even. He told her not to look into it, not to encourage it, and that whatever it was, it had nothing to do with God. I still don't know exactly what to make of all of it. I just know what I saw. I know what I felt in that park. And I know that sometimes, even now, certain places carry something with them. Something you can't see right away, but you can feel it. I was around 17, maybe 18, when all of this started. I had gone to visit my mother's side of the family, and in front of their house, there was this small, very old pool. For as long as I could remember, it had been hidden under wild bushes and vines, the kind of place you could pass 100 times and never really notice. But just a couple of days before I arrived, the local workers had cleared everything away, and suddenly the pool was visible again. I had heard stories about a pool before, mostly from my mother, but I didn't realize this was the same one. When my mother was in 10th grade, around 16 years old, she had once looked into that pool alone in the afternoon. After that, she supposedly became possessed by something. In our area, people called it a samand, the spirit of a man who had died with anger and resentment still burning inside him. At first, she would act slightly different. Then, over time, the episodes became stronger. She would speak and move in ways people described as masculine, almost like she was becoming someone else entirely. My family first took her to a psychiatrist, and for a while, it seemed to help. But then everything came back worse than before. Eventually, they performed a ritual, and according to everyone, that was what finally calmed things down. The strange part is, I didn't know the pool near the house was that pool. Around the same time, I visited an old dry well on my family's land. It had been abandoned for years. Later, I was told that during some digging work, people had used explosives there, and that supposedly angered the local spirits. The story was that the water vein shifted away after that, leaving the well dry and cursed. A worker had died there after falling inside. A bull had also fallen in once, and apparently a few smaller animals too. But when I went there, I knew none of this. I only learned the stories about a year later. After coming back from that well, I started seeing a child in our bedroom. At first, the child was sitting beside an old wooden trunk. Quiet. Still. Just there. Then every day, or almost every day, it seemed to be a little closer. I remember feeling like it was slowly making its way toward me, inch by inch, without ever actually moving while I watched. Then one day, it was inside me. After that, I became deeply interested in ghost stories, not only reading them, but writing them too. And in my mind, many of those stories came from the child. The child told me things, or at least, I believed it did. It said there had been a curse placed on my mother's family by one of my grandfather's cousins. The story was that this cousin had sacrificed his own son to harm my maternal grandfather. My grandfather was supposedly meant to have a second son after his first daughter, but instead, my mother was born. And the child claimed she should have been part of a twin birth. The child had other strange habits too. It would say odd things, like the grass near our college was haunted. It also used to laugh at certain dogs, saying they smiled too much like people. Rain seemed to bother it badly. One summer, I went to the beach with some friends. The weather had been hot and clear, but suddenly a heavy rain came in, with thick fog rolling over everything. It felt unnatural, at least in the moment. Then I had this vivid feeling that the child jumped out of me and ran straight into the rain. And then it disappeared. For a while, it was gone. Then one random day, without warning, it came back and entered me again. It also told me something about my mother's old ritual. My mother believed they had removed the samand by sacrificing or offering another spirit. But according to the child, that wasn't what really happened. It claimed the exorcist had transferred the curse onto an unknown girl instead, and that this girl was still connected to my mother's family somehow. The child said the exorcist had only managed to keep her controlled. There was another incident too. Once, I accidentally crushed a very tiny skull. I thought it belonged to a bird, but afterward I started feeling haunted by a child and an old woman. In my mind, they seemed like a grandmother and grandson. During that time, the child inside me supposedly stepped in, taught them a lesson, and made them leave me alone. I know all of this sounds strange. And honestly, I'm a man of science. I don't want to blindly believe that every vision or voice or feeling is supernatural. Part of me thinks these were psychotic episodes, or maybe some form of schizophrenia, with the child becoming a character my mind created to explain things I didn't understand. But that's what I'm trying to make sense of, because when it was happening, it didn't feel like imagination. It felt like something was there with me. It all started in my old room, the one I slept in until April of this year, 2026. My house has 3 floors, and back then, my bedroom was on the 3rd floor. The stairs from the 2nd floor came straight up to my room, so it always felt a little separated from the rest of the house. Across from my bedroom, there was another room, and inside that room was a mirror. The strange thing is, that mirror pointed directly toward my bed. The door to that room was almost always open too. Honestly, I never thought much of it. I saw the mirror every day, and it became one of those normal things you stop noticing after a while. Nothing terrible ever happened in that room. I have always moved around a lot in my sleep, so waking up tired was normal for me. I never really felt fully rested anyway. But while I was sleeping in that room, with that mirror facing me, I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time. It wasn't dramatic, but it stayed with me. I remember feeling like there was a dark figure standing beside my bed, just watching me. I couldn't move. I also heard this strange vibration in my ears. It didn't have a rhythm or pattern. It was more like a deep, buzzing pressure, almost like something was going further and further into my ears. Then I finally woke up properly. After that, I couldn't fall asleep again for a while. Still, I brushed it off. I didn't connect it to the mirror. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Then, in April, I moved to a room on the 2nd floor. That's the room I'm in now. This room also has a mirror. It's rectangular, with dark wooden edges. The one upstairs was similar, just thinner. But this mirror is much more noticeable because of the way the room is arranged. It points straight at my bed. Straight at me. For a while, nothing really happened. I slept okay, or at least as okay as I normally do. Like I said, I've never been the kind of person who wakes up feeling completely refreshed. But earlier this week, around Monday or Tuesday, something odd happened. I was in that strange place between being awake and asleep. Not fully dreaming, but not fully conscious either. Maybe around 80% asleep and 20% awake. And I started talking to myself. At first, I thought it was just part of a dream. But later, when I asked my mom's partner about it, he told me he had actually heard me. He said it sounded like I was arguing with someone. He didn't really pay attention to the exact words, but he definitely heard me talking. That honestly unsettled me. It had never happened to me before, at least not that I know of. And then, today, I found out that having a mirror facing your bed is considered a bad thing in feng shui. Some people believe it can drain your energy, disturb your sleep, or even act like a kind of doorway. I don't know exactly what I believe. I love paranormal stories, but I'm also the kind of person who gets scared by them very easily. Part of me wants to move the mirror immediately. Another part of me wants to wait and see if anything else happens, just so I can write it down or tell people about it. But I don't know. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's stress. Maybe it's sleep paralysis and an overactive mind. Or maybe that mirror has been facing me for too long. So what do you think? Should I move it, or should I wait and see what happens next? Hey, I want to share something pretty heavy with you today. Something that's been sitting with me for a long time now. It all started the day I sat by my mom's hospital bed, watching that heart monitor tick slower and slower until it finally stopped. I held her hand, Sonia, that's her name, and felt her life slip away with her last soft breath. Tears were streaming down my face, but inside, it was like everything went numb. My mind was flooded with memories, like when she took me and my brothers to that amusement park, the look in her eyes when she saw our faces light up as we realized where we were heading. Or the day she finally won custody from Dad and hugged me so tightly the first time I saw her in months. And there were those snowy days when she welcomed me and my friends inside with warm mugs of cocoa, always telling us to leave our boots by the door. I remember breaking down right there, the weight of losing her after her stroke a week ago crushing me. I pressed my hand hard against my temple as a sharp pain started building, my vision blurring for a moment. When I came to, I was somewhere else entirely, a busy little restaurant. I looked around, confusion flooding me. Where am I? Where's Mom? I whispered, my head turning slowly as the headache throbbed stronger. Charlotte, this kind-hearted woman I'd been seeing, was sitting across from me, her hand reaching out to squeeze mine gently. "What do you mean?" she asked, concern flickering in her eyes. "Are you okay? Maybe we should get you to a hospital." We were on our fourth date, just finished bowling and had come here to eat. I forced a shaky smile and said, "No, I'm okay." "What were you saying?" She hesitated, biting her lip nervously, then said, "I was asking about your book. It's been almost a month since I've heard from you or seen any new writing. We're starting to worry." Her voice reminded me of John, my publishing manager. I could see him now, sitting at his desk, flipping through my manuscript with a furrowed brow. "All right, I'll look this over," he said. "But please, keep me updated. No more long silences." But back in the hospital room, her heart monitor was silent. I stared down at Mom's frail hand in mine, rubbing my thumb in small circles on her dry, wrinkled skin. Something was off. She was my mother, and she had just died right in front of me. Shouldn't I be crying more? I thought I had, but now I felt nothing. Pain exploded in my head again, and I pressed my hands hard against my temples. A groan slipped out of me, and then I felt a soft hand on my cheek, gently lifting my face. It wasn't Mom's hand. It was warm and gentle. Charlotte's hazel eyes, framed beneath her soft brown bangs, met mine with a sincere worry that made me briefly smile. But then the smile faded. Why was she being so kind? I had loved her once, hadn't I? Now, during our best date, all I felt was emptiness. A sudden slam snapped me back to reality, the manuscript packet hitting John's desk. "This is sick," he snapped, anger lacing his voice. "The story's too dark. Who's going to read this?" I could barely focus on his words. The sting of his rejection was old, but it still hurt. "You need to rewrite these chapters," he said firmly, "or this book won't see the shelves." Rewrite? I had tried before, but now the fire that once fueled my writing was gone. John's tone shifted, almost cold. "Jesus, you don't even care, do you? You need help." "What?" I muttered. "Do you need help?" Suddenly, I was back in the hospital again. A nurse placed her hand on my shoulder as I looked down at the woman in the bed. Her face was pale, dotted with freckles that reminded me of embers glowing from her fiery red hair, just like mine. She seemed so familiar, like someone I'd seen around town, or maybe at the coffee shop where I worked. "Who was she?" I asked the nurse. Her brow furrowed. "She's your mother. Are you feeling all right? You really need help." "I do?" "You need help. You need help. You need help," she repeated, her voice echoing like a haunting mantra. "Help me!" I cried out suddenly, and the scene shifted again. I was outside, pressed against the rough bark of a cold tree. The texture was sharp against my skin, tearing my shirt and leaving scratches that burned. My hands clutched the wrist of something gripping my throat. My legs kicked wildly, but it didn't budge. My right eye was crushed painfully by a long tube forced into my skull, and I could only see out of my left eye as I choked on my screams. Its claws bit into my skin, and I felt pure terror. Back at the office, John's voice cut through my panic. "I know you worked hard on this book, but we just can't justify continuing with you. The idea was good, but the delivery was a mess. We have to focus on better prospects. Sorry, but we have to let you go." I remembered the first time he said that. I begged, humiliated myself, promised anything. But now, I couldn't even recall what the book was about or why I cared. John's voice shifted again, becoming almost sinister. "It was a pleasure to meet you." And then I felt something. Its long, worm-like tongue sliding past my eye, making it roll and misalign painfully. It tugged on my skin and brain, and bile rose in my throat from the sickening sensation. The creature dropped to all fours and stepped back. Its body was covered in thick black fur with gray speckles, and the fur along its spine stood tall and stiff. It had 4 limbs with sharp digits perfect for gripping, and a long, furry tail with a tuft of gray at the end. Its face was hairless, with wrinkled pink skin stretched over a narrow skull ending in a short trunk, from which its tongue retracted. Its beady black eyes stared at me a moment longer, before it vanished into the woods. I raised my hand to my eye, crooked now, with a raw, bloody gap where the tongue had slid through. I sighed and stood slowly, feeling hollow and drained. Whatever it took a piece of me. My mind was foggy, memories slipping through my fingers like smoke. I thought writing all this down might help me find clarity, or maybe feel something again. But it hasn't yet. So if you take anything away from this, please, stay out of the woods. There's something there that's not just shadows and trees. It's something darker, something that takes more than you realize. You know, after marrying my wife Susan, we found ourselves in a tight spot financially, all thanks to the wedding. She dreamed of this grand celebration since she was a kid, and, well, despite it being a day to remember, her parents refused to chip in or even show up. So we ended up paying for everything ourselves, which meant pushing our honeymoon back by 6 whole months. Not ideal, but we made it work. When the time finally came for our getaway, we couldn't splurge on anything extravagant. So we picked a cozy bed and breakfast tucked away in the countryside, a peaceful little spot that promised a break from the hustle. We carved out 4 days off after all the overtime I'd banked. Sounds perfect, right? But from the moment we loaded the car and hit the road early that morning, it felt like the trip was cursed. First, we got stuck in what I swear was the worst traffic jam in history. 2 hours of bumper to bumper, inching along. At least the local radio stations kept us company with some interesting tunes. Finally, when we escaped the mess and hit the highway, bam, the back tire blew out. I was so relieved I'd packed the emergency kit and spare tire. Fixing it took its time, and by the time we were back on the road, we were starving. We pulled into the nearest rest stop, grabbed some food, and hoped to still make it to town early enough for some sightseeing before the 4 p.m. check-in. Turns out, no such luck. We called the bed and breakfast owners, and thankfully, they were super understanding, letting us check in anytime that night. Susan relaxed a bit, which was good because I was dreading driving in the dark with my terrible eyesight. So she took over the wheel. We debated the route, originally a slow, scenic drive through small towns. But now, with night falling, we opted for a shortcut to get there faster. Dinner done, plan set, we rolled into the night, wondering what else could possibly go wrong. As we drove deeper into the countryside, the radio shifted from pop to country, then to static, then back to country again. It was like the stations were fading away into the wilderness. The sun had set entirely, and the sky was pitch black, not even a moon or stars to guide us. The only light was our headlights, and the glow from the dashboard screen showing the radio channel. The trees on both sides blurred past, and except for the occasional truck, the road was empty. I've always hated long night drives, but at least Susan was there to talk. She started listing all the pastries she wanted to try in the area. Apparently, the bed and breakfast was near a bunch of bakeries. I laughed, imagining us coming back a few pounds heavier. Then, out of nowhere, I saw something moving out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was just dust on my glasses, so I raised my hand to brush it off. But then, my heart nearly stopped when I realized it wasn't dust at all. A ghostly, pale spider was crawling across the dashboard, inching closer to Susan. Now, I know spiders are supposed to be helpful in their own creepy way, but I'm telling you, I'm terrified of them. I held back a scream, knowing a loud noise could cause an accident. Instead, I let out a small whine. "Hey, what's wrong?" Susan asked, glancing over. I just shook my head, pointing at the spider, unable to speak. My hands were trembling, skin prickling with every step it took. Susan saw it, sighed, and without missing a beat, slipped off her sandal while still driving and crushed the spider. She grabbed some napkins I handed her, wrapped up the body, and tossed it out the window. I swear I heard the crunch. It was huge. "I'm so glad I married you," I said with a shaky sigh. "You eat my peppers, so we're even," she joked. We made a good team. I'd gladly eat all the hot peppers in the world if it meant she'd keep spiders away from me. I hoped that was the end of our excitement, but no such luck. After a while, fog started appearing outside, hanging weirdly among the trees. The headlights cut through it, but the rest of the world beyond was swallowed in darkness. The sky was a heavy blanket of clouds, no stars in sight. Susan remarked, "This fog is strange." I looked closer and realized she was right. The fog wasn't moving. It looked almost solid, like thick white threads stretched across the trees and road edges. I was about to ask her to pull over and get a better look when the roof of the car snagged on the strange white strands. Then, horror exploded before my eyes. Hundreds of pale spiders poured down from the threads onto the windshield. Susan screamed, nearly swerving off the road, but managed to steady the wheel and started using the wipers to knock them away. Spiders clung to the side mirrors and windows, their tiny bodies flying in the wind until the wipers swept them away. I was losing my mind, shoving napkins into the AC vents, fearing they'd crawl inside. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I was shaking all over, barely making sense, probably screaming nonsense. Susan, though freaked out, made a snap decision. Floor it. Her foot slammed the gas pedal, desperate to escape whatever nightmare we'd crashed into. The spider webs became impossible to avoid. Every time we hit a patch, the windshield was smeared with smashed spider guts, making it hard to see. I was dry heaving, curled up with my arms itching like crazy. The road was slick from all the crushed bodies, and Susan was fighting to keep the car straight. I'm so glad we were alone. Otherwise, we might have caused a pileup. I caught myself whispering, "This can't be real," over and over. It was my own voice, but it sounded strange, panicked. Susan's face was pale and sweaty, and she was juggling steering and calming me down. Spider bodies kept getting crushed as we barreled through the web patches. The car groaned and struggled, coated in sticky strands. I wondered if this was some cosmic punishment for all the spiders I'd killed in the past. I promised myself if we survived, I'd never harm another one again. Then, the headlights illuminated pure white, and the road ahead vanished. We couldn't stop. If we did, those things would swarm inside. I was terrified, clutching Susan's arm, praying we'd make it through. The car scraped something tall and thin, a young tree maybe, and the right headlight shattered, but somehow we kept moving. A dark, rumbling growl echoed behind us, like pure rage. I grabbed Susan's shoulder, thinking this might be the end. But then, just like that, we burst through the final patch of webs and onto a perfectly normal, dark highway. We didn't stop to look back. The car was barely holding together, but as long as we kept going, we were safe. The adrenaline crash hit me hard. I started having a panic attack. Felt like a heart attack at first. Susan stayed calm, found a nearby motel, and pulled in carefully, hiding the webs still clinging to the car. She got us a room and gently guided me into the bathroom. I cried in the shower, scrubbing imaginary spiders off my arms until she had to coax me out. She even called the cops, though I didn't notice until I was getting dressed. The flashing lights outside woke the lone other guest at the motel. Neither of us wanted the police involved, but after hearing our story, the dispatcher didn't know who else to send. The motel staff and guest found our spider-covered car fascinating, but kept their distance. The cops went back down the road, found some spider nests and crushed bodies, but nothing like what we described. They kept inspecting our car, trying to make sense of it all. Our honeymoon was over before it began. The experience left such a sour taste, we canceled the rest of the trip, losing just the deposit and the cost of a rental car. We called a family friend to pick up our mess of a car and get it cleaned. I just wanted to sell it and never see it again. On the drive home in the rental, exhausted and shaken, Susan broke the silence with, "Let's do something less terrifying for our honeymoon." I thought about it and suggested, "How about that haunted Navy ship overnight in October we joked about?" We shared a tired laugh. Honestly, after what we'd just been through, ghosts seemed way less scary than a horde of spiders crawling all over us. Hey, I want to share with you a really strange and unsettling experience I had one night. It was late, and I was just heading home after a long, grueling day at work. My car was still in the shop, so I had to rely on the bus to get me back. Luckily, I caught the very last bus of the night. Besides the driver, I was the only passenger on board, quiet, empty, and peaceful. But after working so many overtime shifts that week, exhaustion hit me like a freight train. I promised myself I'd only close my eyes for a moment, just until the next stop. but within seconds, I was completely out cold, drifting into sleep without control. Suddenly, a soft ding above my head jolted me awake. For a moment, I thought it was the bus stopping or some other sound from the vehicle. My eyes fluttered open and I looked around, still groggy and disoriented, trying to figure out where I was. I should have been on the bus, right? But instead, light spilled in through small windows on the sides, and a strange, rotten smell hit my nose, making me gag a little as my brain slowly registered the scene. I wasn't on a bus at all. I was sitting in an aisle seat on an airplane. An airplane? That didn't make sense. I've never actually been on a plane in my life. I have a passport, sure, but it didn't explain how I ended up here. I don't usually dream, and this felt way too real to be one. Panic began to creep inside me. I turned my head quickly, intending to ask the person next to me what on earth was happening. But then I froze. The man beside me was clearly dead. His skin was pale, his eyes milky and unseeing. My heart started pounding uncontrollably, thumping so loud I was sure the others would hear it. Fear held me frozen. I couldn't move. I glanced past him to the woman sitting by the window, and she looked just as pale and lifeless. My mind stopped working entirely, overwhelmed by the eerie scene. Then, out of nowhere, a pair of flight attendants appeared at the front of the aisle. I hadn't noticed them until they began to speak, their voices breaking the heavy silence with a cheerful tone as they went through the usual safety procedures all flights have. Their energy was so out of place, it caught my attention immediately. "Hello, our darling dead ones. We'll be your flight attendants on this flight. Since this plane has zero chance of crashing, this safety talk might be a little different than usual. But first, let us introduce ourselves, because you'll be spending a lot of time with us. My name is Nettie, and this wonderful lady is..." The taller attendant, a man, gestured towards his female partner with a big smile plastered on his face. The woman wore the same uniform, but with a skirt, and she had this unmistakable look of exhaustion, like she just wanted to be anywhere else. "Bodhi," she said flatly, as if she couldn't care less. Nettie, still full of enthusiasm, continued, "We'll do our best to make you all comfortable on this flight, just ask. We modeled this plane to feel just like the ones you might have been on while you were alive. Comforting, right? We even have those masks that drop down in case of emergencies, but you'll never need to use them. You're all not breathing. But we do let the masks drop for fun." His wide smile never wavered. This guy was clearly made for customer service. "Super fun," Bodhi added in a completely monotone voice. "We have drinks and those little packets of peanuts for you to look at. All such fun. And if you ever need us, just press the button for a little ring-a-ding." "Ring-a-ding," Bodhi echoed with a massive sigh. "We're here to help with anything. Does anyone have any questions so far?" Nettie raised his hand as if he was the one asking the question, the bright smile still on his face. He waited a few seconds, looking out over the silent group. To my horror, some of the dead passengers shuffled stiffly in their seats, their milky eyes staring blankly ahead, and their bodies showing signs of decay. Me and the flight attendants were the only ones who looked alive in that plane. I finally gathered the courage to raise my hand. "Oh, terrific! A question! We've never had one of those," Nettie said happily, his smile growing even brighter when he saw me. I like your presentation, but what if I'm not dead and shouldn't be here?" My voice trembled as I asked. For a moment, his smile faltered. Some of the dead passengers tried to turn their heads toward me, but quickly forgot I was there, staring blankly forward again. Nettie hurried over and crouched down beside my seat so we were eye to eye. His kind expression almost made me forget how terrifying the situation was. I noticed I wasn't wearing my contact lenses, which made everything a little blurry after a few feet. When he got close, I realized something else strange about him. His hair wasn't hair. It was silver feathers sprouting from his head. My mouth dropped open in shock, nearly making me shut down. "You poor little thing," You must have had a sudden death and didn't realize it, Nettie explained gently. I nearly fainted. My heart was still beating. How could I be dead? Did the bus crash while I was asleep? What had happened? How did I get here? Nettie slipped a hand to my wrist with a caring look. We'll just check your pulse to prove it. His words cut off suddenly as his eyes grew wide, his mouth clamping shut, and I heard an odd humming sound from him. It took me a few seconds to realize he was muffling his own screams. Then, abruptly, he yanked me to my feet and started hauling me down the aisle. His movements were stiff, matching the eerie, jerky motions of the corpses around us. Yes, sir. You may see the washroom. I'll show you where it is. Let's keep walking this way. Nettie's voice was tense, but he still tried to sound cheerful. The dead eyes of the other passengers watched as I was dragged past them, Nettie narrating our slow, nerve-wracking journey. Walking. Walking. We are still walking. His voice was so strained, it almost sounded like he was singing nervously. When we finally reached the small galley where the attendants prepared meals, Nettie finally released my wrist. Bodhi followed us, wearing a questioning look. She didn't understand why Nettie was dragging a passenger back there. Her feathers were black and longer than Nettie's silver ones. She covered half her face with them, giving her a bit of a goth vibe. Honestly, she looked out of place in her uniform. What got your feathers all in a ruffle? She asked, arms crossed. Instead of answering with words, Nettie grabbed my wrist again and pressed it into Bodhi's hand. It took her a long moment to understand what he was trying to show her. When she did, her eyes widened and her feathers puffed up. Unable to accept what she was feeling, she pressed her ear to my chest to hear the frantic heartbeat. He's alive? She asked, pulling away. I know. Has this ever happened before? Nettie chimed in, glancing between her and me. Why are you asking me? You've done this job longer, Bodhi replied, shrugging. The whole situation was so strange, I couldn't bring myself to interrupt. Nettie nodded thoughtfully and pulled out a notepad, peeling off a gold sticker to place on Bodhi's uniform. A gold star observation, he said. This was too weird to be real. I had to be dreaming or someone was playing the most elaborate prank ever. First, I had to figure out if their feathers were fake. Without warning, I reached out and ran my hands through Nettie's feathers, trying to find the edge of a wig or some kind of headpiece. The silver feathers felt softer and warmer than they looked. Suddenly, a panicked chirping sound made me freeze. I realized it was coming from him. I jerked my hands back, realizing I'd done something really inappropriate and embarrassing. His pale face flushed as he struggled to quiet the chirping. Bodhi gave me a very clear, not a cool move, dude, look. I'm sorry, I didn't think the feathers were real, I stammered. Nettie silently waved it off, signaling it was okay. He still wasn't collected enough to speak. Looking more closely, I noticed details I'd missed before. Their legs were far too skinny for humans to stand upright. Bodhi wore white socks ending at her ankles, but beneath were clawed feet that looked more like a bird's than a person's. Nettie had the same. Their hands had long, bony fingers. Their skin was pale, and their gray eyes almost glittered like silver. These two were definitely not human, as strange as that was to accept. So, what exactly are you two? I asked slowly. Flight attendants, Nettie said cheerfully. No, I mean, you're not human, right? Are you some kind of bird hybrid? Did you hatch from an egg or something? At that moment, I realized I needed to focus on the less weird facts first. After figuring out what they were, I could tackle how I got here and what was going on. They looked at each other, clearly never having considered the question before. I don't know, to be honest. We've just always been doing this. Do you think we even have parents? Nettie asked his partner, who simply shrugged. Okay, so I wasn't going to get answers about their origins anytime soon. I had to focus on the bigger question. Why was I on a plane full of dead people? And how did I get here? From the looks of it, neither of them had that answer. Apparently, anyone on this plane was supposed to be dead, aside from each other. Is there any way to get me home? I clearly shouldn't be here, I asked, hoping for a good answer. Well, this has never happened before, so I wouldn't know. This plane never lands. Since you're alive, I can't really explain the point of this flight or how it works. But maybe we can ask Saudi about this. He's trained all of us and is like a father figure. Getting to him is going to be difficult, though. Nettie tried to stay positive as he spoke, but my bleak outlook seemed to dampen his cheerful vibe. That wasn't a good sign. He mentioned going to see Saudi rather than talking to him directly. Was this someone else trapped on the plane? Or was Saudi in a hard-to-reach spot? I was confused, so Nettie elaborated. We can move between planes. The catch is, we need a feather from the pilot. He's a bit grumpy most days. I can ask him for help. I don't mind, but it might not turn out great. He sounded nervous, but I clung to any hope I could find. If we needed a feather, then we'd get a feather. I'd crawl on my hands and knees if I had to. It sounded like something we could manage if the pilot was anything like these two. Please, let's go talk to him. I know he'll listen to reason, I begged. The two exchanged looks. Bodhi shook her head with a worried expression, but Nettie brightened. He was determined to do his best for me. At that moment, I had no idea how far he was willing to go. You're the passenger, and it's our job to make your flight as pleasant as possible. Let's go talk to the pilot. The cockpit is on the other side of first class. Follow me, mister. Actually, I don't know your name. I know all the names of people who should be aboard, but yours is blanking. Cooper, I told him quickly. I don't really like my first name, Devin, so I usually go by my last name. I thought I heard a happy chirp from Nettie as he nodded and took my wrist again. I didn't really need the guidance, but he held my hand just in case. Bodhi sighed in frustration and followed behind us. As we walked, I remembered how terrifying it was being surrounded by the dead. Nettie's cheerfulness helped ease my fears a bit, but every row we passed was a fresh wave of horror. The dead passengers showed clear signs of how they died. Some wore hospital gowns, others had clothes stained with dried blood. The smell wasn't overpowering, but enough to make me feel sick. Each pair of dead eyes stared at us as we passed, as if they wanted something or could sense the life I still had. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a small, empty space beyond first class. I don't know if all planes are set up like this, but the door to the cockpit was closed tight. Nettie stopped in front, but didn't knock just yet. He glanced over his shoulder nervously. I don't know how he'll react to someone alive on the plane, so try to breathe as little as possible, he warned. Bodhi shoved me into a corner and stood in front, trying to shield me from view. Their actions made me regret ever asking to come here, but it was too late. Nettie knocked politely a few times and asked the pilot to come out to speak with us. Black feathers nearly blocked my sight as I tried to control my breathing. When the door finally opened, I nearly choked on my own fear. A massive creature, far too big to fit comfortably inside the small cockpit, pushed out into the aisle. Its entire body was a black mass of feathers. Two huge, clawed hands hung at its sides, and its head stretched up to the ceiling as it looked down at the nervous Nettie. The pilot's face was nothing more than two glowing red eyes locked onto him. Sir, I hate to bother you in the middle of a flight, but... Nettie's words were cut off instantly as both of the pilot's huge hands shot out and wrapped around his throat. Nettie choked out a silent plea as the pilot forced his thin body to the ground. His frail legs kicked weakly, trying to break free. I gasped, about to rush forward to help, But Bodhi was stronger than me and held me back. I needed to do something fast before Nettie was killed because of my mistake. His struggle slowed, his face growing pale. Even his feathers began to droop and lose color as the life was being choked out of him. Desperate, I scanned the tiny space for anything I could use to help. The only thing was a dusty, forgotten drink cart. Holding my breath, I darted from behind Bodhi, grabbed a can of soda, and flung it down the aisle into first class. The pilot turned his head toward the noise, and I snuck behind him, grabbing one of the black feathers sticking out from his body. The pilot stepped forward, distracted by the sound, not noticing me pulling a feather out. Once the pilot was in first class, Bodhi scooped up the limp and barely conscious Nettie. We all pressed ourselves as close to the wall as possible, trying to stay out of sight. My heart was pounding, the adrenaline rushing through me, hoping what I did was enough to save Nettie and get me closer to answers about this nightmare flight. You know, I still remember the moment that door creaked open. It wasn't just the sound. It was that smell that hit me first. It was so thick and rotten, like the air itself had given up. I almost doubled over, eyes waterproof uncontrollably. Nettie, his legs so thin and fragile looking, was right there beside me, and together, we took a few hesitant steps forward. My shoe suddenly sank almost up to the laces in something thick and black. Each step felt like wading through tar, heavy and slow. Nettie was struggling too, his slender legs trembling with the effort. Around us, the plane was a nightmare on its own. Black mold spots spread like a plague over every surface. The grime was so thick it felt like the place was already rotting away, falling apart from the inside. I wanted to turn back. I really did. I tugged at Nettie's hand, hoping he'd agree. But when I looked over my shoulder, he gave me this weak, reassuring smile. Despite everything, he was strong enough to keep going, and that gave me the courage to push forward too. Fingers tightly intertwined, we stepped through the doorway and started down the endless aisle stretching across the plane. The passengers we passed were beyond anything I'd ever dreamed up in my darkest nightmares. There were groans and eerie clicks coming from their seats as we moved slowly past. I held my breath, trying desperately not to catch their attention. Some seats were occupied by nearly skeletal remains, their flesh long gone, while others were just sludgy, blackened masses of decay. Red eyes glowed out of the darkness, like tiny embers burning in the gloom. Some of those passengers raised their hands, and as they did, the ooze slid away from their blackened bones. My stomach turned over. I couldn't imagine walking through the entire plane like this. Just as we were clearing the first section and nearing the small divider that separated first class from the rest, a cold, spongy hand landed on my arm. I jumped, muffling a scream that threatened to escape. Looking down, I met those glowing red eyes staring straight back at me. In that instant, my mind went blank. I saw death, not the peaceful kind, but the true, horrifying essence of it. A crushing wave of misery and dark grief washed over me, threatening to drown my very soul. I felt like I'd never recover from that moment. And then, without even realizing what I was doing, I opened my mouth to scream. But Nettie was quick. He swooped in, muffling me and dragging my struggling body into the cramped attendance area. I pushed away from him, slamming against the wall and trying to hide behind the drink cart. He whispered urgently, trying to shush me as my breathing became ragged, stars dancing in my vision. I couldn't do this. I couldn't be there. I wanted to be back in my crappy old car, at my dead-end job, somewhere safe. If I couldn't go there, I thought, I'd rather die than stay on that cursed plane. Just as I felt myself slipping into that terrible abyss, Nettie pulled me back. A warmth blossomed in my chest, chasing the frantic panic away. My breathing steadied. My vision returned. The flight attendant ran a gentle hand through my hair, whispering words of encouragement. Without him, I wouldn't have made it this far. When I'd calmed a little, he gave me a shy smile, relieved to see me better. But then, movement behind him caught my eye, and my heart froze. I barely managed to choke out a warning. Nettie turned his head, eyes narrowing at the dark figure that shambled into the room behind him. It looked black, like the rest of the plane, but its red glowing eyes stared at us through dripping feathers. Its long, thin legs gave it the eerie shape of a flight attendant. Nettie stood, facing the creature as I stayed crouched on the floor, my body trembling with pure fear. But instead of trying to flee, Nettie took a few cautious steps closer. "Seti," he said softly, voice almost a whisper. "Is this where you ended up?" The creature responded with a sudden lash, clamping a set of jagged jaws onto Nettie's shoulders. Amazingly, he didn't flinch. Even as it clawed him, he wrapped his arms around the decaying figure. Then, just like he did with me, he spoke gently, trying to calm it. From the sounds and the way he spoke, I could tell they had a history, an old connection. I didn't expect it to work, but slowly, the attacks lessened, the dark arms dropping to its side. The teeth lifted from Nettie's bleeding shoulder, the red eyes gazing blankly at him. It was impossible to read what the creature was feeling. "Go," came a low, hoarse whisper, barely more than an intake of breath. Seti had snapped back to awareness, for now. Nettie gave his friend one last hug before taking my outstretched hand. I could see tears in his eyes, not from his wounds, but from something deeper. We pressed forward, desperate to escape before anything else could happen. We walked faster, all those glowing eyes boring into us. Nettie's hand trembled in mine. That crushing darkness began to creep back. I felt countless eyes fixed on my back. A cold sweat broke out all over me, and my breathing grew uneven. Then, a sound. One of the passengers rose from their seat. Their body mostly intact, they slipped into the aisle just a few rows away. That simple act inspired others. Our pace quickened to the fastest we could manage, slogging through the sludge on the floor. Seti followed behind, his red eyes unreadable. With freedom just a few rows away, a hand suddenly reached out to grab mine. I pulled with all my strength, but I was stuck. Nettie's eyes widened in horror, a scream building in his throat. I was about to be dragged into the growing horde. I pulled again, desperate, when an unexpected savior emerged. Seti snapped the arm holding mine. Using his free hand, he tore into his own face, deep gashes bleeding freely. The sight and smell drove the creatures wild. It was my turn to save Nettie now. He screamed, trying to reach his friend. I grabbed the light flight attendant off his feet, dragging him away with one arm around his waist. Dark forms swarmed Seti, biting and tearing at him. For a brief moment, I saw his face looking back at us, a faint hint of a smile through the decay. Then, more creatures piled on, pulling him apart. More came rushing toward us. I managed to get inside a small room with Nettie, slamming the door shut just as bodies thudded against it, trying to break in. For a second, Nettie looked like he wanted to open the door and try to save Seti again. I quickly locked it and pulled him into a tight hug, trying to calm him as he had calmed me. In that dim, cramped room, I held his frail body as the creatures pounded outside. His eyes were wet, his body shaking from stress. I couldn't help anyone," he choked out. I dared to run my hand through his feathers once, then rested my palm gently on his cheek. His silver eyes were wet as he looked up at me, so different from the confident person I'd met earlier. I wanted to blame myself for forcing him into all this. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I shook my head. "You helped me. We're almost there. We can do this. I know we can." Once I get home, you'll be able to come back and save Seti. With more help, right? A faint smile appeared at my words. Until he could return with reinforcements, Seti would be torn apart again and again. That he couldn't die was almost too much to bear. We needed to move so Nettie could focus on saving another soul. Even with the pounding outside, he seemed calmer now. He bowed his head slightly, silently asking for one more head pat before we pressed on. I ruffled his feathers, wishing us both luck. We approached a small book set into the wall, and Nettie wrote down the location of the next, and hopefully, final, plane. The sounds faded as we jumped to it, our hands still tightly clasped. I watched the pilot's feather dissolve into dust. "How are you going to get back?" I asked, surprised I hadn't thought of it before. "I'll take a feather from the pilot here. After you get home, there won't be a rush for one," he replied, his voice less cheerful than before. My stomach nodded. That could take forever, and we had no idea what awaited on this plane. Would it be as dark and twisted as the last? I couldn't bring myself to voice my fears. Instead, I let him lead me out into a noisy, dimly lit military plane. The roar of the engines drowned out my thoughts. It was a small plane, 6 men strapped in full gear, heads down, eyes closed. I spotted a steel door at the end, and my heart flipped, thinking I'd soon have to jump. Before Nettie acted, he pulled out his small notebook, scribbled something quickly on a piece of paper, folded it in half, and sealed it with a golden star sticker. I reached for it, but he tucked it into my zipped work pocket. Thank goodness for that. He moved to the end of the seats, searching for what we needed. To my surprise, he easily grabbed what looked like a backpack. As if he'd done this before, Nettie helped me strap on the parachute. He didn't want to risk waking the men, so he wrote notes on when to pull the chute. I was terrified. But if I died on the jump, maybe I'd see Nettie again. I wasn't ready to leave, but we had no choice. Suddenly, one of the men lifted his head. Red eyes locked onto us. I hoped they weren't like the others, but I was wrong. This plane showed no signs of rot, but the men were changed. 2 more lifted their heads, and Nettie shoved me toward the door. His arm was grabbed, and the 2 men who weren't strapped in reached for him. I grabbed a rifle from a sleeping soldier and used it like a bat. The gun was rusted, useless otherwise. We broke free amid chaos. A rush of air as Nettie opened the door, but hands grabbed his neck from behind. He fought fiercely, grabbing the front of my shirt, and with surprising strength, pushed me out the door. I screamed, clutching his arm, begging him not to let me go. Soldiers tore at his feathers and skin, deep cuts appearing, yet Nettie smiled at me. I couldn't leave him behind. It would be the same fate as Seti. My pleas were ignored. With one last bright smile, Nettie let me drop out of the plane. I don't remember the fall or pulling the cord. The first thing I recall after falling was waking up in a hospital, in an entirely different country. I'd been missing for a month before they found me in Scotland, tangled in a tree with my parachute. It had malfunctioned, and everyone called it a miracle I was alive. No one could explain how I got there or why I'd been dropped from a plane. I didn't offer answers, and given my injuries, people assumed I'd lost my memory. My parents, who were doing okay financially, though not rich, were baffled and thought I'd been kidnapped for ransom. Why they'd take me across the sea and dump me from a plane was beyond anyone's understanding. My relationship with my parents hadn't been great, but my mother came to bring me home. Flying again so soon felt surreal. This time, I did it in a wheelchair. The fall that should have ended me left me disfigured. My face was scarred, and I lost my left leg below the knee. I could have died, so I wasn't as upset as I thought I'd be. Thankfully, they kept my possessions, including the small note sealed with a golden star sticker that proved it all was real. Neatly written was a time, date, and place set a year after I left the hospital. That year was tough. I learned to walk with a prosthetic leg, though some days the phantom pain was unbearable. I took speech therapy because my torn lip made talking without a lisp almost harder than walking. Maybe it was all in my head. I also learned to drive with my new foot, though I didn't do it much. As the meeting approached, I regretted not getting plastic surgery. On the drive to the airport, I kept touching my scarred lip, wondering if the person I was about to meet would turn and leave once they saw my face. I waited anxiously at the airport spot written on the note. I'd read those words hundreds of times, triple-checking to be sure I was in the right place. Then, I saw him. Someone I thought I'd never see again. His face lit up when our eyes met. He took off running toward me, weaving between people, a duffel bag bouncing against his back. "I knew you were alive," he shouted, excitement plain in his voice. I wrapped him in a hug, hardly believing he was really there, Nettie, on solid ground. He looked more human than ever. His hair was so blonde it was almost white, fluffy and styled like he'd stepped out of the 80s, but somehow it fit him. His silver-gray eyes sparkled, and freckles dusted his flushed cheeks. "I'm so happy to see you're safe I could kiss you," I blurted, then regretted it instantly. "I wouldn't mind," Nettie said with a quiet laugh. When he realized what he'd agreed to, a muffled scream escaped him, and I thought I saw his soul leave his body. His face went pale with embarrassment, too mortified to say anything. I didn't need an explanation. Ducking down, I did exactly what I promised, a gentle kiss. A shocked chirp came from him, and his hair puffed out into feathers for half a second. That moment, after everything, felt like a new beginning. Hey there. I want to share some stories with you. Some are a little spooky, some are strange, and others just stick with you in the quiet moments. Pull up a chair and let me take you through each one like I'm right there with you, sharing these experiences from the heart. So, when I was about 12 or 13, let's call me Jamie, I often found myself home alone after school. My folks and my little sisters usually wouldn't be back for another hour or so. Honestly, I didn't mind the solitude at all. It was nice to have the house to myself. I could eat whatever I wanted, blast the TV volume without the usual scolding, and vent about my day to my friends on FaceTime without interruptions. One particular afternoon, I walked in, dropped my bags by the door, and all I wanted was to make a fresh bowl of mac and cheese and maybe let a few tears out. I was just so tired. So, that's exactly what I did. I started boiling some water, just trying to distract myself when suddenly, I heard it. The unmistakable heavy thud of big snow boots stomping around downstairs. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be anyone in my family. My dad, who's usually the first home besides me, wouldn't be back for another hour. Even if he'd come early, he'd have texted me, and I would have heard the garage door. Trying to keep calm, I told myself it was probably the washing machine rattling unevenly. So I turned off the stove and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find, just in case, and slowly made my way downstairs. The washing machine and dryer weren't even running. My mind just froze. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Then, out of nowhere, the air around me turned icy cold. I felt it. Someone standing just behind me. When that person breathed down my neck, all caution left me. I bolted up the stairs, adrenaline pumping like crazy, hearing footsteps pounding behind me, and heavy breathing that made my skin crawl. At the top, my grip tightened around the knife. I whirled around, ready to defend myself, and there was no one there. I figured whoever it was had slipped back downstairs. I locked myself in the bathroom and messaged my dad, who told me to stay put and keep quiet. When I asked if I should call 911, he said no. There I was, in that bathroom, fighting back tears because my worst nightmare was happening. Then I heard it again, the heavy boots coming up the stairs. My stomach dropped as the footsteps neared the door. I covered my mouth, but my panicked breathing still echoed. I could see the shadow of those boots beneath the door, feel the breath on the other side. Tears streamed down my face, frozen in fear. Suddenly, my dad's garage door opened. Relief flooded me. I heard the intruder dash into my parents' room. My dad searched the whole house, but there was no sign of anyone. No broken windows, doors locked tight. The only thing out of place was the basement. It was a mess, even though my mom had just cleaned it earlier that day. Dad joked it was all in my head, but I know what I heard and felt. Now, rewind to when I was about 8 or 9. My grandma invited my sister and me for a sleepover. It was one of those perfect days: shopping, soccer in the backyard, chalk drawings on the patio. When bedtime came, I was wiped out and fell asleep in my uncle's old room down the hall, while my sister crashed on the living room couch. Everything was normal until I felt someone's presence in the room. I've always had a knack for sensing energies, knowing when someone else is there. I thought my sister had a nightmare and wanted to talk, so I turned over to reach for her. But it wasn't my sister. Standing in the doorway was a tall man, arms crossed, looking angry and upset. At first, I thought it was Grandpa, but this man was much taller and his face was different. The way he glared at me sent chills down my spine. I got out of bed and walked toward him, but as I approached, I ran right through him, crying and screaming to my grandma. Years later, when I was about 12, Grandma was going through a box of old photos. She paused at one in particular, a young man whose face sparked that old memory. When I asked who it was, she started crying and said it was her dad, who had died young. It hit me hard, realizing that figure in that room was probably my great-grandfather. Fast forward to when I was entering 8th grade, living in a big, single-story house with a sprawling backyard next to a riverbed. There was a huge metal shed out back that looked like it was for fixing semi-trucks. The house had 4 bedrooms, though my brother's room was actually a converted den. Long hallways connected everything, and my mom's room was at the far end of the hallway, the place where most of the strange things happened. At first, it was little stuff. Weird smells like baby powder, misplaced objects, knocking on doors early in the morning. But then, more serious things started. One day, when my uncle was living with us, we were in the living room watching TV on one of those giant old-school sets. His phone was charging on top of the TV, which was cluttered with decorations. Suddenly, the phone lit up like a spotlight and then flew off the TV, like literally flew, not just slipped. We all jumped. Mom rushed in from the kitchen, and my uncle, still shocked, said, "No one touched it. It just lit up and flew off." We tried to shrug it off, but it was just the beginning. Another time, my brother was washing his breakfast plate in the kitchen and felt this overwhelming dread. Then, a sudden gust of wind brushed past him, and something tugged his shirt. He spun around, but no one was there. Freaked out, he told Mom, who's very spiritual and a devout Christian. I remember one morning getting ready for school, tying my shoes on a chair facing the door, when I caught a glimpse of a black hand wrapped around my door frame. I jumped back and saw a face, pitch black, eyes black, wearing an old feathered hat, peering from the corner. I screamed, and it vanished. Mom came running, prayed with me, and tried to calm me down. That night, sharing a room with my older brother, I was scared after what I'd seen. I fell asleep, but woke up paralyzed in the dark. Through the reflection in the mirrored closet doors, I saw a creature crawl out from under the bed, hop onto my brother's bunk, and stare at me with glowing red eyes. It looked like an evil monkey. I couldn't move or scream, but my brother woke up, turned on the light, and the creature disappeared. Mom came in, prayed, and I finally went back to bed. My siblings had their own experiences. My sister dreamed of a body hanging from the bathroom window. My brother saw a noose hanging there, and the lights flickered. Once, he was in the bathroom panicking and asked me to stay awake with him all night. My older sister heard children playing and calling her name in the hallway and inside her room. She hated that house to this day. My older brother was shaken awake by violent shaking, like an earthquake or a train running through the room, but he couldn't move. He prayed, and when he opened his eyes, everything was normal. This happened several times. One night, my sister-in-law and I woke up to the sound of typing on the computer keyboard, even though the computer was off. We checked, but found nothing. Our uncle, who lived with us then, told my parents we had demons in the house after witnessing kids running into rooms that were empty. He searched the house and couldn't find anyone. Mom told a story about my oldest brother sneaking into her room at night, but once she heard door noises and footsteps, then felt someone sit on the bed, only to find no one there, but an impression remained. She prayed, and the impression disappeared. One day, the same brother collapsed suddenly in the kitchen, apparently blacking out. Paramedics came but found no cause. Then, a strange man appeared at our front door. He said he'd lived there 20 years ago and warned that the house was haunted and cursed. He explained the knocking and baby powder smell were from his mother, who had a heart attack there and still knocked to say she was around. He showed us an old photo with a figure wearing a feathered chief's hat, black face and eyes, matching what I'd seen. He warned us to be careful. We moved out and the haunting stopped. Years later, a friend bought the house and had his own terrifying experiences, including feeling a breath on his neck and hearing a deep voice ask, "What are you doing here?" I think Mom's prayers kept us safe. Now, about this shadowy figure I've seen for about 15 years, let's call me Alex. Growing up in a spiritually active home, ghosts and spirits felt normal. But when I was 15, I met a different shadow. A tall man who would pace silently across my bedroom, from the living room door to the bathroom door, leaning against it, watching me with a cold, almost clinical presence. Sometimes he seemed angry, sometimes deadly, never comforting. People would say he was protecting me, but that never felt right. Even now, at 30, I sometimes see him watching. I found stories about the Hat Man connected to trauma and negative emotions. The only thing is, I never saw a hat on him, just that tall, dark figure. And then, there was this time at the park with my 2 kids and our dog. The playground was fenced in, and as we were leaving, I noticed a well-dressed older couple near our car. The woman headed to the bathrooms, and the man walked toward the playground. I glanced back to check the kids, and in less than 2 seconds, the man was suddenly on the swing, laughing and swinging. I commented lightly about how swings don't go as high or squeam like they used to. He replied with a chuckle, agreeing. But just moments later, when I looked again, he was gone. The swing was still moving violently, like he jumped off and vanished. I hurried the kids into the truck, and the couple was nowhere to be found in the park or by their car. It felt like a glitch in reality. Finally, let me share a story about desire, regret, and a dark secret. When I was a kid, I desperately wanted a pair of light-up shoes. I wasn't into video games or flashy toys. Those shoes fascinated me. I tried to save up and begged my parents, but they said no. Why buy new shoes when I had good ones? There was a classmate who had a pair, and I envied them every day. I even teased him a bit, which I regret now. We became friends, and though his dad spoiled him, he was down to earth and shared snacks and toys generously. But he never gave me the shoes. One weekend, when his family was supposed to be away, I planned to sneak into his house and take the shoes. I told my parents I was going to the store and waited for nightfall, heart pounding. I crept to his place, unlocked the door with the key he hid under a frog statue, and slipped inside. The house was dark, but dimly lit by streetlights. I looked for the shoes near the door, but heard a noise, a soft whimper, coming from the basement. Curious and scared, I went down the creaky wooden stairs into the cold basement with cobweb-covered exposed ceilings. Shelves packed with tools lined the walls. Between the clutter, I saw a man strapped to a chair, tears and blood on his face and hands, missing fingernails. Then, another figure appeared. It was the father, the kind man I knew, but now cruel and monstrous. He tortured the man, demanding names of people connected to illegal videos. The captive sobbed, and the father's face twisted into a horrible beast. The man was torn apart before my eyes. I was frozen in terror, sobbing, wishing I could disappear. Then, a hand touched my shoulder. The father's human face returned, bloodied but calm. He asked what I was doing there, and I broke down, confessing everything. He laughed, called me adorable, and promised not to tell if I kept quiet. He cleaned up, disguised himself, and brought me home, claiming I got lost. Months passed, and though my friend wanted to hang out, I couldn't face his house. Before he moved away, he gave me a box with a new pair of light-up shoes. I thanked him but hid them away, never touching them again. Those shoes became a symbol of a lesson learned, a reminder of the darkness hidden beneath appearances and the value of choosing kindness over desire. Thanks for listening. I hope sharing these stories brings some comfort, or at least a little thrill. Sometimes, the shadows we see aren't just in the dark. They're inside us too, shaping who we are. Hey, I want to share with you a story that's pretty personal and, honestly, a little strange. It's about how I went from being a total skeptic about anything paranormal to someone who genuinely believes there's more out there than what we can see. Now, I wasn't the type to mock or belittle people who believed in ghosts or spirits. I actually loved hearing ghost stories, especially the ones that felt real. You know, where people saw or heard things or had a physical experience. But the ones about people getting hurt or crazy supernatural stuff, I always thought those were a bit far-fetched. Still, I always kept a bit of doubt, a grain of salt with every tale. But then, as I experienced more strange things myself, my view started to shift. Not enough to believe in all the wild stories, but enough to take these encounters seriously. Let me tell you about the moments that led me down this path. The first odd thing I remember happened when I was about 6 years old. I was at my babysitter's house, and one day I was walking down the hallway. The bathroom door was wide open, so I peeked inside. Everything looked normal. I turned to keep walking when I suddenly heard a noise. I went back to the bathroom and saw that one of the drawers was now open. It freaked me out, so I ran back to the living room. I didn't understand it then, but that was the first time something unexplainable happened to me. Fast forward to when I was 11. My family and I lived in an apartment, and I had this constant feeling that someone else was there with us. During the day, with everything going on, school, family, TV, I could ignore it. But at night, when the house went quiet and the distractions faded, the feeling returned stronger. It was like there was a person in a white robe wandering the halls. I couldn't shake it. One cold November night, I was home alone, and it got so intense that I stayed on the porch for 2 hours, waiting for my family to come back. From that porch, I looked inside the window and saw the curtains shifting, like something passed by. I'm not sure if it was just my imagination, but it really felt real. Then, more recently, after my grandpa passed away, my family went to Mexico for the funeral, and I stayed back because of college. Those 2 weeks alone were tough. I was paranoid, constantly feeling a man walking through the rooms at night. I'd hear doors creaking open or closing, which would send chills down my spine. But when morning came and the house filled with normal sounds again, I checked every room and found nothing out of place. Still, the feeling lingered. Now, here's the story that truly changed me from skeptic to believer. In 2020, I took a year off school due to a transfer mishap and got a janitor job. It was a chill gig, cleaning 4 clinics with a small crew. The clinics were in small towns, each 30 to 40 minutes apart. The problem was, my coworkers often didn't show up, so sometimes I cleaned all 4 clinics by myself. At one clinic, Clinic C, which was near a creepy alley in a quiet town where everything shuts down at night, I kept hearing this dripping noise. I went to check the sink, looked under it for leaks, but found nothing. I stayed a while trying to pinpoint the sound, but it disappeared whenever I left the room. It was unnerving. Then, on my second to last day at Clinic D, the biggest one with both clinical and dental services, I had the most unsettling experience. There were stories from nurses about hearing a woman scream. One time, I closed a restroom door and it screamed loudly, so I assumed that was the noise they heard. There was also a silver tray that kept falling, which I thought explained some clattering sounds. But that night changed everything. My coworker and I were waiting in the large lobby for the last person to finish mopping. The lobby connected to the dental area through a glass door, giving a clear view down a vertical hall leading to patient rooms, a lab, and the dental area. Most lights were off, and the floor was wet. My coworker asked me something, and as I answered, I glanced down the hall and saw a pair of legs walk past a wall, heading toward the lab or dental door. I called the mopping coworker, thinking she might have forgotten and was about to walk on the wet floor, which we all knew was a no-go. But she answered from behind me, still mopping the entrance. I walked down a dry hallway connected to the same hall and saw the legs again, but no footprints on the floor. The legs wore sneakers and black scrubs like nurses, but when I told my coworkers, they saw and heard nothing. The building was empty. I told my mom about it that night, and she suggested maybe someone brought a spirit in with them, good or bad, and it got attached to the place. Her words helped me calm down, and I pretended it didn't affect me. But deep down, I knew what I saw was real. I realized the noises and sightings the nurses talked about probably came from that spirit. That experience sealed it for me. I was no longer just a skeptic. Looking back, I'm grateful for these experiences, even the scary ones. They taught me there's more to this world than meets the eye, and sometimes the unseen is closer than we think. You know, I never thought I'd find myself telling a story like this, but here I am, and I just want you to listen closely, because it's not something I can just brush off. So, it all started when I was just so damn exhausted. I mean, my body was aching, my eyes felt raw, and sleep was this elusive thing that wouldn't come no matter how badly I needed it. I sighed deeply, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me, and said to myself, I'll go back to that alley tomorrow. She'll turn up. She has to. That thought was both a comfort and a torment. I tried not to dwell on the image of her, scared, lost, wandering the cold streets, searching for me, wondering why I hadn't found her yet. And that, my friend, kept me wide awake longer than I wanted. To distract myself, I started scrolling through old photos. It was bittersweet, really. Seeing her running wild and free across the fields of my childhood home brought back a flood of memories. God, I miss those days. I kept scrolling, letting nostalgia wash over me, until I landed on the most recent picture, the one with her and the other dogs. I smiled softly, ready to put the phone down, but then something caught my eye. There was this pattern in the grass. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. The lawn wasn't just uneven. It bulged in lines that formed a circle right around the dogs, and running through that circle were patches of bare, disturbed ground, like the earth had been torn up and laid out deliberately. You ever seen those optical illusions online where the caption says, "The longer you look, the stranger it gets"? That's exactly what I felt staring at this picture. Every time my eyes drifted, I noticed new, unsettling details. 2 birds hung dead from the trees, their feet bound with thin, stringy rope, swaying just slightly in the breeze. The brick walls behind the dogs were carved with strange, almost ritualistic drawings, hidden in plain sight. Between the dogs, half buried in the grass, was something red and glistening, wet, fresh, and deeply wrong. And then, the worst of all, Shelby's eyes. They weren't the warm brown I knew. They were yellow. Glowing, unnatural yellow. Just as my heart started pounding faster, a knock at the door shattered the quiet. It was sharp and close, like someone was right there. I almost dropped my phone. The knock came again, louder this time, and my whole body started shaking, the same way my front door used to tremble when someone pounded on it furiously. Something, was inside my house, knocking on my bedroom door. I swallowed hard and slowly got out of bed, every nerve screaming at me to run, to hide. I was already reaching for my phone to call 911 when I heard it. A bark. From the other side of the door. I couldn't help myself. I flung the door open and stepped into the living room, eyes straining to make out the figure in the shadows. There, crouched in the corner, was something that looked like a dog. Or maybe, what used to be my dog. "Shelby?" I whispered, my voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. It answered in a voice that was almost, but not quite, hers. "Shelby?" The sound was high-pitched, strained, like it was squeezing the words out through cracked, dry lips. I froze, heart pounding so loud I was sure it would give me away. Then it stood up, on its hind legs, and started moving toward me. And that's when I saw it, for what it really was. It was like something had stolen Shelby's skin and crudely stretched it over a twisted frame. It didn't fit right. Some parts sagged, hanging loose and torn, revealing glistening blood beneath. Other parts were pulled tight, cracking and oozing dark fluid. Thin, sinewy appendages dangled from its limbs, twitching in the dim light. Its mouth hung open unnaturally wide, and inside, I could see another face, watching me with something cold and alien. Beneath the skin, its body writhed and pulsed, as if something desperate was trying to break free. This thing was massive, towering over me at least 7 feet tall. It lowered its face to mine and sniffed over and over, like it was trying to find something. Through Shelby's gaping mouth, I saw a dark, wet mass stretching out, like 100 crawling fingers reaching along the inside of her throat toward me. Panic surged, and I stumbled back, slamming my bedroom door shut. I locked it, though. It didn't even sound like it was trying to get in. It just kept whispering her name over and over, a haunting chant that filled the room. I didn't hesitate. I flung open my window and climbed out into the cold night air, heart hammering in my chest. The last thing I saw before I hit the ground was that terrible snout, pushing under the doorframe, sniffing desperately for me. Now, I'm sitting at my friend's house. I ran to the nearest gas station, called her, and she came straight over without asking too many questions. I told her only that something was in my house and I needed to get out. She didn't pry, which I'm grateful for. I'm typing this on her laptop because I need to remember all of it, even the parts that don't make sense, because I know what I saw. I know something took Shelby from me, something that wore her skin but wasn't her. and I don't know if I'll ever be able to go back home again. Hey, I want to share something pretty personal and honestly, still a little unsettling. It's about the old apartment my wife and I used to live in. It was haunted, without a doubt, and in the end, it forced us to move out. I remember it all so vividly, and I want to tell you exactly how it unfolded. So, right after we moved in, which was a big change for us because we both worked the night shift, meaning we slept during the day, something strange happened. We were lying in bed, the house quiet except for the hum of the city outside, and suddenly, I heard this soft, clear voice of a child whispering, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," coming from my wife's side of the bed. At first, I thought it was our stepson trying to get our attention, so I rolled over to see what he wanted. But then, just as I turned, there it was, a shadow, the shape of a kid, crouched on all fours right over my wife. It was dark and blurry, like something out of a nightmare, but when I blinked and rubbed my eyes, it was gone, vanished like mist. The apartment itself was actually the bottom floor of a house divided into two separate apartments, top and bottom. I had checked both before moving in, and I chose the bottom because it was bigger and had a basement. I thought it was a good choice. But then, about a year later, one night when I was coming home from work, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. I looked up at the house and saw a pale face staring out from the attic window. It was so clear and chilling. Now, the upstairs apartment did have tenants, but I knew for sure that the landlord had bolted the attic shut. I'd asked when I was checking out the upstairs unit. So, there was no way anyone could have been up there. There were lots of other little things, footsteps echoing when no one else was home, shadowy figures flickering out of the corner of my eye, and that constant, creeping feeling of being watched, like something was always lurking just beyond the edge of sight. But things got worse when my wife got pregnant. The atmosphere around her seemed to thicken with something dark and restless. As her belly grew, she'd sometimes wake up with scratches across her skin, deep enough to hurt, but with no explanation. And there was this one night, she swore an unseen force knocked her right off her feet, just like that. But the real breaking point came after our son was born. We started finding scratches on him, little marks that couldn't have been from his own tiny nails. After the first time, we made sure he wore mittens to bed, because babies' fingernails are sharp enough to cut themselves sometimes, and we always dressed him in onesies to protect his skin. But the scratches kept appearing, and that was it for us. We could handle the strange things happening to us, but not to our baby. So before his first birthday, we packed up our things and moved into a house we bought ourselves. That new place is haunted too, but not in a harmful way, more like it's alive with memories, and that's a whole other story for another time. Before we left, we felt we had to warn whoever would move into the apartment after us, but we didn't want to come across as crazy or scare off potential renters, because the landlord was a good person who treated us well. So, we did something subtle. There was this section of wood paneling in the basement that could be pulled off to reach the water main. I figured any curious tenant would eventually pry it open. So I wrote a note addressed to the next tenants, explaining what we had experienced and warning them about what they might encounter. I taped it inside the panel where it would be found, but kept it discreet. Maybe some will think I was an ass for not telling them outright, but honestly, it felt like the right balance. We didn't want to cause needless fear, but we also wanted to pass on the warning. That old apartment left its mark on us, and sharing this story is a way for me to make sense of it all. Thanks for listening. So, just to give you a little backstory, my grandma had been renting a handful of different places around the San Diego area for quite a while. This was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I came out to visit her while I was still away at boarding school. A few nights into the visit, I started getting restless. I was bored, young, and not exactly making the wisest choices, so I ended up finding some psychedelics. It honestly wasn't that difficult. I got a strip of acid and some Molly, and at that point in my life, I was already pretty familiar with both. One night, I decided to party by myself. I know how that sounds, but at the time, I was feeling great. No weird energy, no bad thoughts, nothing heavy. I was staying at my grandma's house, and I wanted to go outside so I could call a few friends without being overheard. So I started walking down the stairs, just kind of amazed at how high I was, taking everything in. But as I got lower, I noticed something off to my left, right near the bottom of the staircase. There were 3 figures standing there. They were shadowy, almost smoky looking, and each one was a different height. They weren't solid exactly. They looked like they were made out of some dark vapor, just standing together in a row. And the strange thing is, I wasn't scared at first, not even a little. I remember thinking, well, this must be part of the trip. I had done these substances before, so I thought I understood what was happening. I even kind of laughed to myself. I might have said out loud, "I am so high." I walked down the rest of the stairs and moved closer to them. They didn't move. They didn't react. They didn't reach out or turn their heads or anything dramatic like that. They were just there, waiting at the bottom of the stairs. After maybe 30 seconds of standing in front of them, something shifted in me. That easy, playful feeling started to drain away. I remember suddenly thinking, wait, I've never had a trip like this before. That was the moment it stopped feeling like a hallucination. I reached my hand out toward one of the figures, almost like I needed to prove something to myself. My hand passed right through it, and the shape sort of broke apart, like smoke being disturbed. And the second that happened, this sharp bolt of fear shot straight through my body. It was instant, like my whole nervous system lit up. At that exact same moment, this bright, strobing light flashed from the kitchen down the hallway to my left. That was enough for me. I turned around and got out of there as fast as I could. The weirdest part is that the rest of the night was actually fine. I ended up wandering around the neighborhood, talking to friends, and somehow still had a pretty good night. But I never forgot what happened in that house. It stayed with me. When I got back to boarding school, I remember saging everything I owned because I had this awful feeling that I had picked up something dark. I don't really know how else to explain it. It felt like something had attached itself to me, or followed me, or at least brushed against me in a way it shouldn't have. And I know the substances make the story sound questionable. I completely get that. But I had never experienced anything like that before, and I have never experienced anything like it since. There was one more thing that really cemented it for me, though. A couple of days later, my dad and stepmom came to visit too. I hadn't told anyone what happened, because that would have meant admitting I'd been partying. They probably wouldn't have had a huge reaction, but I was still trying to look responsible in their eyes. One night, I convinced everyone to go out for sushi. I was sitting in the back seat with my grandma on the way there, and out of nowhere, she started telling this story about when they first got the house. She said she had gotten the real estate agent drunk one night, and the woman admitted something she apparently wasn't supposed to say. 2 other families had already backed out of escrow on that same property because they thought the house was haunted. They also complained about strange, rotten smells. Then my grandma just casually said something like, "Well, I'm not afraid of ghosts. I grew up in Connecticut in a haunted house. I hear footsteps upstairs sometimes, but it doesn't smell here, and it doesn't scare me." I think she also mentioned that they had checked for a skunk and never found anything, though I'll admit that part might be my memory filling in gaps. But hearing her say that, without me having told her a single thing, really locked it in for me. I probably could have brushed the whole experience off eventually, or blamed it on the drugs, but that conversation made it feel different. It made it feel real. And honestly, I still don't know what I saw. I just know that, even with everything I was on that night, it didn't feel like anything I had ever experienced before. Ever since I was younger, I've had this strange pull toward paranormal things. Not in a dramatic way, really. More like I've always felt there was something around the edges of life that we don't fully understand. I've had dreams about places I'd never been before, only to end up standing in those exact places years later. I've dreamed about moments that hadn't happened yet, and then, one day, they did. I could talk about those experiences for hours, honestly, but that's not really what this is about. What I want to talk about is something that has only happened a few times in my life, but every time it does, it shakes me to my core. I get these episodes where I become absolutely terrified of death. And I don't mean the normal kind of fear, like, one day I'm going to die, and so will the people I love. It's not that. It's heavier than that. It feels immediate. It feels like death is already in the room with me, sitting close enough to touch. There's never any warning. Nothing sets it off. I can be doing something completely ordinary, and then suddenly it hits me hard and fast. All I can think about is death, dying, the people I love leaving this world, what comes after, all of it. It feels like pure doom, and when it happens, the things that usually help me calm down don't touch it. Medication doesn't help. Cold showers don't help. Breathing exercises barely make a dent. The only thing that gives me even the smallest bit of peace is being outside. I know that probably sounds strange, but I mean it literally. I have to be near trees. I have to put my hands in the dirt. Sometimes I'll sit barefoot in the woods, just pressing my feet into the ground, trying to feel connected to something solid. Nature is the only thing that makes the fear loosen its grip, even a little. The episodes usually last around 4 or 5 days. Then someone close to me, or someone connected to my life, passes away. And after that, the episode just ends, completely. Like a storm that vanishes all at once. The first time it happened, I was pretty young, so the memories are blurry. I mostly remember the fear, and then my grandfather passing away not long after. At the time, I didn't really understand it. I was too little to make sense of it. The second time was around 2019. Same pattern. No trigger, no warning, just that sudden, crushing fear. I spent days trying to ground myself, going outside whenever I could, sitting in the grass, touching the soil, trying to breathe through it. Then my childhood best friend Haley died unexpectedly. It wasn't something anyone saw coming. She hadn't been dealing with some long illness. It was sudden and awful, and it broke something in me for a while. I still miss her so much. But the strangest part was that as soon as I found out, the episode stopped. Just like that. The dread was gone. And now it's happened again. This latest episode started while I was grocery shopping last weekend. I was walking through an aisle, looking at completely normal things. Cereal boxes, fruit, canned soup. And then that feeling dropped over me. That same terrible certainty. That same sense that death was nearby. By the second day, I kept telling my husband, Evan, that I thought someone was going to die. I told him it didn't feel like regular anxiety. I know anxiety. This wasn't that. It felt like a warning, like something was coming closer, and I could feel the shadow of it before it arrived. On the 5th day, I slept in, and when I woke up, I felt normal, completely fine. The fear was gone. I remember lying there and thinking, maybe it really was just anxiety this time. Maybe I made it bigger in my head. 2 hours later, Evan called me, completely devastated. His grandmother had passed away earlier that morning. She had helped raise him. She was more like a mother to him than anything else. It happened suddenly, and because she had a DNR, they let her go peacefully. She was a wonderful woman. She raised a kind, strong man, and she meant everything to him. We're going to miss her deeply, but I can't stop thinking about it. I don't know what to call this. I don't know if it's intuition, or grief arriving early, or something my mind does that I can't explain. I just know the pattern keeps happening, and every time it does, I'm left standing there afterward, trying to convince myself it was a coincidence. But deep down, I'm not sure I believe that anymore. So, this happened a couple of nights ago, and honestly, I still don't really know what to make of it. I've had sleep paralysis before. Usually it's small things, like feeling a light touch on my arm or something tugging at my foot. Sometimes it feels like there's this heavy pressure on my chest, almost like someone is sitting on me. But this time was different. This one felt worse than anything I've experienced before. That evening, I made the mistake of taking a nap. It was around 6:30 or 7, and I ended up sleeping until almost midnight. When I woke up, I felt completely off. You know that strange, displaced feeling after a long nap, where your body is awake but your brain is still floating somewhere else? That was exactly it. I was annoyed with myself too, because I had work early the next morning. I went out onto the balcony, smoked a cigarette, came back inside, and scrolled on my phone for a while. I think I finally tried to sleep again around 1:40 in the morning. At first, I fell asleep pretty deeply. I remember feeling comfortable, really comfortable. I was having a good dream too, nothing scary at all. Then, out of nowhere, I felt someone tucking me in. Not in a sweet way, not gentle. More like someone was carefully pulling the blanket around me, sealing me in. I could actually hear the covers moving. I felt the fabric being adjusted around my shoulders, my sides, my legs. Then came the weight. Something heavy pressed down on me, right on top of my body. And just as that happened, I heard a laugh behind me. I couldn't see who it was. I tried to make a sound, and all I managed was this loud, strained groan. I was hoping whatever it was would stop, or let go, or back off. But then I heard a voice. It said, "Shh, sleep." It wasn't soft. It wasn't comforting. It was stern, serious, like a command. That's when I really started to panic. Part of me thought, fine, maybe I should just go back to sleep. But another part of me got angry because how am I supposed to sleep after being woken up by something holding me down and whispering at me? The strangest part is that I don't think I was fully awake. I was still dreaming, but the dream was happening in my apartment. I could see my room. I could feel my bed. Everything looked exactly the way it does in real life. In the dream, I kept trying to turn around. I wanted to see what was behind me. I wanted to know what I was dealing with. But every time I tried to move, my body went numb and weak, and I would collapse back into the bed like all the strength had been drained out of me. Then I heard my window closing. That's what really set me off. I can handle being scared. I can handle strange noises, pressure, voices, whatever. But don't touch my window. I always leave it open a certain way, and hearing it shut made something in me snap. I woke up immediately and looked over. The window was still wide open. After that, I tried to go back to sleep, but it wasn't easy. I just sat there in bed, still tucked in, looking around the room and waiting for something else to happen. And then it did. I woke up again, except I was still dreaming. This time, I saw a swarm of tiny flies coming toward me. There had to be more than 100 of them. They were flying straight at me, circling around my face and body, almost like they were teasing me. It felt like they were saying, "You can't do anything anyway." Somehow, I woke up from that too. Or at least, I thought I did. Then I must have drifted off again, because the next thing I heard was footsteps coming up the stairs outside my apartment. Slow. Careful. One step at a time. The hallway lights weren't on. Everything was dark. Then I heard a key being pushed into my door, slowly. But I always leave my own keys in the lock from the inside, so there's no way another key should have worked. I heard it stop, like whoever was out there realized they couldn't get in. Then the key was pulled out. Again, slowly. And after that, the footsteps went back down the stairs and faded away. I could keep saying, then I woke up again, then I went back to sleep. But the truth is, at some point, I couldn't tell what was a dream and what was real anymore. That was the worst part. Everything was happening in my apartment, in my bed, around my own things. Living alone has its good sides, but nights like that make the silence feel huge. The last thing I remember was looking around the apartment, trying to find whoever or whatever had been messing with me. And near the window, the same window I had heard closing, I saw someone standing there. Not a person exactly. A shadow. Completely black, darker than the room around it, standing in the middle of my apartment and facing me. It didn't have eyes, but I could feel it staring. I barely slept after that. Every time I closed my eyes, another nightmare started. Usually, when I have nightmares, they're about my father chasing me. I know that fear. I recognize it. But this was different. Being laughed at, tucked in, whispered to, surrounded, watched by something I couldn't even see properly. That felt worse. I don't know what it was. I don't know why it keeps happening. I just know it scared me badly enough that I haven't really been able to tell anyone. I lost both of my parents. My dad has been gone for 11 years now, and my mom passed away a little over a year and a half ago. I've always had really vivid dreams. That's been true my whole life. After my mom died, I moved back into my childhood home with my boyfriend, Nate. He's 26 and I'm 25. We weren't planning to stay forever. The idea was just to clean the place up, repaint some rooms, give it a little care, and then sell it. But ever since we moved back in, my dreams have changed. My dad has shown up in my dreams for years, and those dreams never really scared me. He usually runs toward me with this huge smile, like no time has passed at all, and we sit together and talk. It almost feels like catching up with him somewhere quiet and safe. With my mom, though, it's different. Every time she appears, her back is turned to me. My dad always comes toward me, but she's always walking away. I don't really want to pick that apart too much, because the dreams themselves aren't the part that worries me. The important thing is this: I never see her face. Not once. My mom died in that house, so at first I wondered if maybe she was still there somehow. I'd catch little glimpses of movement around corners. Sometimes I'd see what looked like her passing through the kitchen, always turned away from me. And it really did look like her. She was tall and slim, with hair she dyed a deep black for as long as I can remember. That is exactly what I kept seeing. A tall, thin woman with black hair. But again, never her face. Nate and I were talking about it yesterday because he's had strange experiences in the house too. We've heard footsteps at night together. He's seen shadows move where they shouldn't. So bringing it up didn't feel strange anymore. Then he told me he had seen my mom twice in the last few days. At first I thought, okay, that fits. That's unsettling, but it fits. Then he got quiet and said, she didn't have a face. He told me she had leaned her head around a corner and looked straight at him. But where her face should have been, there was just smooth, pale skin. No eyes, no mouth, nothing. Just her black hair framing this blank white space. And he said it happened twice. That was when something inside me went cold, because I realized I have never seen her face either. Not in the house, not in my dreams, never. Now I'm not sure it's my mom at all. I don't know what is in this house, but I'm starting to feel like whatever is here may just be wearing the idea of her, or using the outline of her. And that feels so much worse than thinking my mom might still be around. For context, neither of us is on medication. Neither of us has any history of hallucinations or anything like that. We've both seen and heard things separately, and we've experienced some of it together too. Nate has been my best friend since we were kids, so I know he isn't lying to me or trying to mess with my head. Honestly, if he thought I was imagining it, he would tell me. I checked the carbon monoxide detectors first, and they're working fine. Even my dog reacts to it sometimes. He'll suddenly lift his head, perk up his ears, and stare toward the same hallway or corner we're looking at. So now I'm left with this awful question I can't shake. If it isn't my mom, then what is it? I've been thinking a lot about how much one person can affect your life, and honestly, it still surprises me. I don't mean just emotionally or mentally. I mean in a way that felt deeper than that, almost like something around me started shifting the moment she entered my life. About 4 years ago, I was assigned a support worker through an assisted living service. I'll call her Marin. At first, I didn't know what to make of her. She seemed ordinary enough, but after she became involved in my life, things slowly began falling apart. My finances started getting worse. My housing situation became unstable. Friendships and professional connections began to strain or disappear, and every time Marin came to see me, something bad seemed to happen not long afterward. I know how that sounds. I really do. But it was never just one thing. There were near accidents, injuries, people suddenly turning cold toward me, unexpected bills that drained my savings. I lost my old job when the company downsized. My landlady, who had once been reasonable, abruptly turned against both me and my housemate. And recently, something happened with my foot. I've always been someone who walks a lot, someone active, someone who needs that movement. But now I'm using walking sticks because of a strange injury that might be rheumatic. It came out of nowhere, shortly after I saw Marin again. The earliest thing I remember was with my official case manager. He had been kind to me in the beginning, almost fatherly in the way he cared. He listened. He made an effort. But after only a few weeks of dealing with Marin, something in him changed. I was there during the meeting, and nothing bad was said. Nothing dramatic happened. Yet afterward, it was like he simply gave up. On the work, on himself, and on me. Before Marin, I had received support for nearly 10 years without this kind of chaos. But after she came into the picture, one support worker after another seemed to burn out, quit, or withdraw. It felt like anyone who had close contact with her got pulled into some strange current of bad luck. There was also a doctor she came with me to see once. After that appointment, that doctor stopped taking me seriously. Even though I have rheumatism and several officially diagnosed physical conditions, she began blaming everything on psychological issues and refused to sign me off sick anymore. For a long time, I tried to explain it away. I told myself I was imagining patterns. I told myself life was just hard. But then Marin completely lost her temper with me, and something inside me finally snapped awake. I canceled her support. I removed her from my life. And then, almost immediately, things started changing. I began climbing out of debt. I started caring for myself again. My health became a priority instead of something I was too exhausted to manage. Material things began improving. Paperwork I had been waiting on finally started moving. Doctors began listening to me again. Most of all, my motivation came back. It felt like air returning to a room that had been sealed for years. That's why I don't think this was simply about her bad-mouthing me behind my back. It felt more energetic than that. I could feel the difference in my own body once she was gone. I felt lighter, freer, more myself. Now there's one final meeting tomorrow, and even though I know I'm strong enough to get through it, I can already feel that heavy uneasiness creeping back in. It's strange, because part of me feels steady, but another part of me is nervous in a way I can't fully explain. I know Marin works a lot with crystals and keeps herbs in her home, and I keep wondering whether there was something darker going on, something intentional, something I don't have language for. I'm not asking anyone to think I'm crazy. I just know what I lived through. The whole situation was bizarre on so many levels, especially the way that, only hours before this final meeting, the same dark feeling has returned. But this time, I'm not the same person I was before. This time, I know what it feels like to be free. I was in 8th grade when all of this started. Because of some family circumstances, I had to stay in a hostel for the first time. My mom was preparing to go abroad, and there really wasn't anyone at home who could take care of me properly, so I didn't have much choice. I was scared, of course, but I tried to adjust. For the first few months, everything was normal. Nothing strange happened. I slowly got used to the hostel routine, the noise, the shared rooms, the bunk beds, all of it. I slept on the lower bunk, and my bed was placed right in front of the door. I remember my aunt, Anita, once telling me that sleeping directly opposite a door can make you feel scared at night, or that strange things can happen. I didn't take it seriously back then. I thought it was just something elders say. But later, I started seeing something. At first, it was just a dark figure standing beside my bed. I told myself I was probably imagining it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was half asleep. So I ignored it. But then I started seeing it almost every night. It would just stand there. Quiet. Still. Dark. After some time, I began hearing a dragging sound too, like someone was pulling one leg across the carpet. That sound terrified me more than seeing it, honestly, because it made the whole thing feel real. I tried my best to ignore it. I didn't tell many people because I thought they would laugh or say I was making it up. But around that same time, I started getting sick often, which was strange for me because I usually don't fall sick easily. Somehow, months passed. Grade 8 ended, and after that, I didn't stay in the hostel during grade 9. Slowly, I forgot about what had happened. Or maybe I forced myself to forget. But then, in grade 10, I was put back in the hostel again. The next incident happened during my 3rd week there. One evening, it was already getting dark, maybe around 7. The hostel warden asked me to go to the main building and leave some notebooks there. So I went. That building was almost empty, and only a few lights were on. It had that heavy, quiet feeling, the kind that makes you uncomfortable even when nothing has happened yet. I was getting scared, so I started singing a song softly in my head, just to distract myself. Then, from somewhere far inside the building, I heard a female voice singing the same song. That was the moment my whole body froze. There was no one there. I looked around, but the building was empty. Completely empty. I got so scared that I quickly left the notebooks on the table. But when I turned around to leave, I saw a black figure standing there, looking straight at me. Even though the place was dark, I could still see it. Not clearly, but enough to know it was there. And more than seeing it, I could feel it staring at me. I ran back as fast as I could. That night, I could barely sleep. The next night, I went to fill my water bottle. The place where we filled water was just above our study room. While I was filling it, I suddenly felt that same presence again. It was so strong that I stopped immediately. I was about to leave the bottle and go downstairs when the window suddenly slammed shut. It was a sliding window. I know how those windows move, and I'm sure the wind couldn't have closed it with that much force. I turned off the light and looked back. Even without the light, I knew something was watching me. Then I realized it was standing near the same side where I had been filling water. It didn't have a proper shape, so I can't really explain what it looked like. It was just dark, like a shadow that didn't belong there. I ran out again. Later, we used to have night classes. My seat was right in front of the door, with my back facing it. During class, from the corner of my eye, I saw a black figure standing at the doorway. After that, I changed my seat. One night, around 8 or 9, the lights went out. I was standing near the door, and there was just a little bit of light coming from outside. In front of the door, there was a pillar with a mirror on it. Suddenly, I felt that presence again. I looked into the mirror, and there it was. That figure was standing in front of the mirror, watching me. So, this happened a few years back, when me and my roommate Jack were kind of between places for a little while. Not homeless in the dramatic sense, nothing like that. We just had this awkward stretch where our old lease had ended, but the new apartment still wasn't ready. So for about 2 weeks, we bounced into an Airbnb in San Antonio, just to have somewhere to sleep until we could actually move in. It was a studio, tucked inside this apartment complex, and honestly, there wasn't much to it. You opened the front door, and the bed and TV were immediately off to the left. If you walk straight ahead, there was this little doorway into the kitchen. And I mean little. Barely enough space to turn around in. The bathroom was just off to the right of that. That was the whole place. No hallway. No separate rooms, really. Just one open area, and then those 2 small doorways. But the thing I remember most about it was how exposed it felt. The unit was right in the middle of the complex, next to the dog park, so people were constantly walking by. You'd hear dogs barking, people talking, footsteps outside the window at all hours. It always felt like the outside world was pressed right up against the glass. Now, I've always been the early-to-bed type, and Jack was the total opposite. So around 10 that night, I passed out. Lights off. Jack was still awake beside me, scrolling on his phone in the dark, which was completely normal for him. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a hand grab my shoulder. Not a light tap, not a gentle shake. He yanked me awake. I opened my eyes, and Jack was sitting straight up in bed, completely still. His eyes were locked on the kitchen doorway, and I knew right away something was wrong. I whispered, "Jack, what is it?" He didn't look at me. He just said, really quietly, "I think someone's in here." At first, I thought he meant he'd heard something. A noise, maybe. A cabinet, a door, something like that. So I asked him, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I was watching a video on my phone, and I saw a man walk past the bed into the kitchen." That's when I started to wake up for real. Because again, this apartment was tiny. If somebody came through the front door and walked into that kitchen, they would have passed right beside us, within arm's reach. There was no distance, no corner to hide behind, no long hallway, just the door, the bed, and the kitchen. I'm a pretty skeptical person, so my first thought was that maybe he'd seen a shadow. Maybe something moved across his phone screen, or maybe his eyes played a trick on him. So I asked, "Are you sure it wasn't just something in the corner of your eye?" He finally looked at me, and the way he did, I still remember it. He said, "I was wide awake. I saw a man walk past me." And the thing is, Jack was not the kind of guy who scared easily. He was calm about almost everything. I had known him for years, and I had never seen him wake me up like that. I had never seen that look on his face. So when he said it that plainly, something in me went cold. I reached into the nightstand and grabbed the knife I kept there. I'm not trying to sound tough because I wasn't. My heart was pounding. But the place was so small that if someone was really standing in that kitchen, there wasn't much mystery left. I was about to find out. I got up and turned on the kitchen light. Nothing. The cabinets were closed. The floor was empty. Nobody was there. I checked the bathroom next. Nothing there either. I came back out and just stood in the middle of that tiny apartment, holding the knife, listening to the silence. There was no one. I told Jack I didn't find anybody. He didn't argue. He didn't panic. He just gave this small shrug and said he knew what he saw. And honestly, that bothered me more than if he had freaked out. He wasn't trying to convince me. He wasn't building it up. He just seemed completely certain, like the matter was already settled in his mind. So I started looking around more carefully. I checked the door, the windows, the corners, anywhere someone might have slipped in or out. I even started thinking about hidden openings, loose panels, weird crawl spaces, all those paranoid movie thoughts that show up when it's late and your brain decides to turn into a crime documentary. I didn't find anything. But I'll be honest, I was tired, shaken, and not exactly doing a professional search. So maybe I missed something. Maybe there was a way in or out that I just didn't see. We left the next morning, and I still think about it sometimes. Was there actually someone in that apartment? Did they somehow get out before I turned on the light? Did Jack see something real, or did his mind just fill in the dark with a shape that wasn't there? I still don't know. All I know is, whatever he saw, I never found it. And part of me is still glad I didn't. I want to tell you about a session I did with a man I'll call Amir. He was an adult man from the Dallas area, and during the healing journey, he went into a very deep theta state. At first, he moved back through childhood memories, then into older pain, older fear, older imprints, and then he went even further. He went to a place before he was born. What he found there was not what either of us expected. He said that before this life, he and his mother were together, but not in bodies, not standing in a room, not even as two separate people the way we think of separation here. He described it as if there was no distance between them, no wall, no edge, just awareness. He said, "It feels like there's no space between us. I'm not really a person yet. I'm more like a soft shape of consciousness." His mother was near him too, but not as the woman he would later know. She was more like another point of awareness beside him. Close, familiar, connected. Then he became aware of something that felt like a life plan. Not a written list exactly, but something like a knowing. He could sense the experiences waiting for him in the life ahead. Weakness, helplessness, confusion, pain, hard lessons. And he didn't want to go. He said very quietly, "I don't think I want to go there." He could feel that it would be difficult, not just uncomfortable, difficult in a way that would shape him from the inside out. But then another understanding came in. He realized that this was part of how light learns to enter darkness, not by looking at pain from far away, not by studying it as an idea, but by living inside it long enough to understand what others feel. He said, "It feels like this experience is required." His higher self showed him that the purpose was not to fix everything. It was not to erase the pain before it happened. It was to understand. He said, "It's not about changing it. It's about understanding it. And that stayed with me, because you can observe suffering from the outside and still not know it. You can read about grief and still not know grief. You can talk about fear and still not know what fear does to the body. Some things can only be learned by entering the room yourself. Then he saw his mother's role more clearly. On a soul level, she had agreed to play a painful part in his life. Her role was harsh. Her presence would shape him through pressure, through difficulty, through emotional weight. And in one sense, it made him stronger. It prepared him for a world that would not always be gentle. But there was a cost. And that is important to say. Understanding a soul agreement does not excuse harm. It does not make cruelty beautiful. It does not mean a person should pretend they were not hurt. But it can sometimes change the way the wound is carried. In that space, Amir understood that some souls volunteer for dark roles, not because they are evil, not because pain is good, but because, from a much wider level of consciousness, certain lessons require contrast. Certain awakenings only happen when the soul touches what it came here to transform. When the session was ending, his higher self gave a very simple message. Love everyone. Let go. Learn to forgive. Not as a command, not as something forced, more like a door opening. The lesson from this journey is this: you may have chosen more of this life than your human mind can remember, even the painful parts. Not because you deserved suffering, not because you were being punished, but because before you came here, some part of you wanted to understand something that could only be learned through direct experience. And the people who hurt you may have been part of that learning too. That does not make what happened okay, but it may help you stop carrying it like a chain. So here is a simple practice you can try. Find a quiet place where no one will disturb you for about 20 minutes. Sit down or lie back, whatever feels natural. Close your eyes. Take 5 slow breaths. With every exhale, let your body become heavier. Let your arms soften. Let your legs sink. Let your head rest fully into whatever is supporting you. Now imagine you are standing at the edge of a vast, dark space. Not frightening darkness, not empty darkness, more like the darkness before the stars appeared. Warm, endless, alive. This is the space before incarnation, before the body, before the name, before the story began. Step into it. Let yourself float there. There is no ground beneath you, no direction, no need to do anything. Just awareness. Then ask silently, show me the moment before I came here. Do not force an answer. Let whatever comes come. Maybe you see light. Maybe you feel another presence near you. Maybe you sense a choice being made. Maybe you feel hesitation, as if some deep part of you remembers not wanting to come. That is okay. Just observe. If something appears, stay with it. Don't analyze it. Don't judge it. Don't try to make it logical. Be with it like you are watching a memory older than your body. When you feel ready, take 3 slow breaths and return. Open your eyes slowly. Then write down whatever came through, even if it makes no sense. Especially if it makes no sense. The logical mind will want to explain it away. Let it be strange for a while. Try this for 7 days in a row. The first time, you may see nothing. That is completely normal. Sometimes the door opens only after we stop pushing on it. By the 3rd or 4th day, something may begin to surface. A feeling, an image, a knowing, a quiet memory that does not seem to belong to this life. Trust what comes gently. You do not have to prove it. Just listen. want to tell you about something that happened to a friend of mine back in 2015. He was from Mandi in Himachal Pradesh, and his name was Chetan. Now, if you know anything about Himachal, you know people call it Dev Bhumi, the land of deities. And in places where people believe the divine is close, they also believe the unseen is never too far away. Back then, Prashur Lake was not as crowded as it is now. It was mostly locals who went there, especially people from Mandi. One afternoon, Chetan and another friend of his decided to ride up there on a scooter. They reached the lake, visited the temple, took a few pictures, sat around for a while, and then started heading back around evening. By the time they were on the road back to Mandi, it had already grown dark. And that road, especially in those days, could feel completely cut off from the world. There were long stretches with no houses, no shops, no streetlights, nothing. Just the narrow road, the mountains, and thick deodar and pine trees standing on both sides. Even in daylight, some parts of that route felt strange. At night, it felt like the forest was listening. Then, at one of those isolated stretches, their scooter suddenly gave up. The petrol tank was empty. Chetan got angry at his friend because it was his scooter, and he asked him why he hadn't checked the fuel before they left. But there was no use arguing for long. They were stranded, surrounded by darkness, with no sign of any house nearby. So they decided to drag the scooter downhill and keep moving until they found someone who could help. After some time, they noticed a girl walking toward them from the opposite side of the road. That alone felt wrong. It was pitch dark. There were no houses anywhere nearby. No reason for anyone to be walking alone there, especially not a young girl. But as she came closer, both of them saw that she was very beautiful. She was dressed like a village girl, wearing traditional Himachali clothes, and for a moment, they were almost too stunned to react. But Chetan told me that something inside him immediately warned him not to speak to her. So he kept his head down and continued dragging the scooter. His friend did the same. They both pretended she wasn't there. Then the girl stopped near them and asked, very calmly, "Where are you going?" Neither of them answered. They just kept walking. After a few seconds, she spoke again. This time, her voice had a strange playfulness in it. She said, "Do you want to see a magic trick?" That was when Chetan's whole body went cold. Before either of them could say anything, the girl lifted one hand. Then, with the fingers of her other hand, she began pulling the fingers from her palm one by one, not bending them, not twisting them, removing them. She pulled them out like they were pieces of a toy, then placed them back again as if it was nothing. Chetan froze. Then his eyes dropped to her feet. They were turned backward. The moment he saw that, both he and his friends screamed. They grabbed the scooter and started dragging it as fast as they could, half running, half stumbling down the road, reciting the Hanuman Chalisa out loud with whatever breath they had left. After a little distance, Chetan looked back. The girl was gone. There was no sound of footsteps, no movement in the trees, no figure standing on the road. She had disappeared as if the darkness had swallowed her. They kept going until, after what felt like forever, they finally saw a house. They knocked on the door and told the man inside what had happened. The local resident listened, and instead of laughing, he scolded them. He told them they should never travel that road after dark. He said people had seen a Chudale there before, a witch. According to him, she had haunted that stretch for years, and several locals had encountered her around the same spot. He gave them some petrol, and somehow they managed to get back home safely late that night. But I still remember how Chetan looked when he told me this story. He wasn't trying to entertain anyone. His hands were shaking, and he had goosebumps while speaking. And the thing is, in our stories, a Chudale often appears as a beautiful woman to lure men toward her. That is why I believe Chetan was lucky. Not just lucky, actually. Brave. because many people might have fainted right there on that lonely road. But he kept moving, kept praying, and got himself and his friend away from whatever had been waiting for them in the dark. You know, ever since I was old enough to understand the world, I never actually saw them with my own eyes. Not once. But my family did, or at least they came close enough that the fear settled into our house like damp air. And even now, after all these years, whenever I think back to that old cinema, I still feel something cold move quietly through my chest. When I was little, my family lived in a small village near the Ochi River. People called the place Bai Riverside. My mother raised silkworms at home, mostly to keep herself busy, while my father worked as a projectionist at the town cinema. He only came home once or twice a week. Most nights, he slept in the front building of the theater. Around 1989, the county town started building new apartment blocks. Back then, there was a policy that if you bought one apartment, 2 people in your family could change their rural registration into urban registration. To my parents, that sounded like a doorway opening for my younger brother and me. They wanted us to become city residents someday, to have a steadier future. So they gathered every bit of savings we had and rode their bicycles into town to pay the deposit. But when they arrived, the person handling the payment wasn't there. They had no choice but to ride all the way back home, planning to return the next day. By then, it was already late. The road from the county town to our village was about 20 kilometers. When they were almost home, my father said he was thirsty, so they stopped at my aunt's roadside house for water. The bicycle was left outside, and the money, all of it, was still hanging on the bicycle. They forgot. Only after they finished drinking did they remember. By then, the money was gone. For our family, that wasn't just money. It was years of saving, years of hope, years of my parents swallowing hardship without complaint. I still remember seeing my mother cry quietly during those days. She tried to hide it, but children notice the things adults think they can cover. The next year, I was about to enter 6th grade. My father wanted me to study at a better school, so he managed to transfer me to the town's central elementary school. Since it was too far from our village, I moved into the front building of the cinema and lived there with him. Not long after that, my father decided it made no sense for my mother, my brother, and my grandmother to stay back in the village. We needed income now. The cinema business was still good, so my parents planned to sell snacks inside the theater during screenings. Melon seeds, peanuts, sugarcane, little things like that. And just like that, our whole family moved into the cinema. That is where the real story begins. The cinema wasn't like cinemas today. It wasn't only for movies. Back then, a cinema could also be a meeting hall, an opera stage, a performance venue, even a place for public rallies. It was more like the town's giant wooden heart, beating with everyone's noise. The old people in town said that before the cinema was built, there had been a large assembly hall on that same land. It had mud brick walls and a straw roof. One day in the 1950s, after a meeting ended and everyone had left, a storm came down hard. Thunder rolled over the town, lightning struck, and the whole building collapsed. When people cleared the ruins, they found snakes. Not one or two, countless snakes. Dead snakes under the rubble, dead snakes beneath the foundation, layer after layer of them. The government sent people to haul them away by the cartload and bury them somewhere else. Later, the cinema was built right on that same foundation. It was the grandest building in town then. There was a front building, the main auditorium, and a rear stage building. The front and back sections were 2 stories tall, while the auditorium was 1 story but very high and hollow. The floors and stairs were made of wood, and whenever you walked, they creaked like they were answering you. At first, we lived in the front building. For the first few months, everything felt new. My grandmother, my mother, my brother, and I were still getting used to town life. But after you live in a place long enough, the stories begin finding you. People said strange things had happened in that cinema. One story was about a woman whose son had been sentenced during a public rally held there. She believed he had been wrongly accused. During the rally, she shouted again and again that her son was innocent, begging the authorities to reopen the case. No one listened. They dragged her out for disrupting the proceedings. After everyone left, she went alone to a room on the far right side of the rear stage building and hanged herself. Her body stayed there for days before anyone found her. I've thought about her many times. A person doesn't choose that kind of ending unless the pain inside them has nowhere else to go. Then there was another death. In the early 1980s, the cinema was packed almost every night. People didn't have televisions or DVDs then. Movies were a window to the outside world, and everyone wanted to look through it. But the town also had gangs. Young men with tattoos, groups with names like the Green Dragon Gang, the Renzi Gang, the Plum Blossom Gang. They were everywhere, and the cinema was where young men liked to show off. One night, a fight broke out between two groups. The front rows turned into chaos. People stood up, shouted, climbed onto chairs to watch. A young man sitting near the back wanted to see what was happening. He stood on his seat. Then he climbed higher, onto the backrest. But above him, one of those huge ceiling fans was spinning. Everyone was watching the fight, so nobody saw it happen clearly. They only noticed when he fell. The screams that followed were louder than the fighting. That young man had nothing to do with the gangs. He was just watching a movie. Gone. Just like that. After hearing those stories, I kept telling myself that both deaths had happened in the auditorium or the rear building. We lived in the front. Surely, if there really were things there, they wouldn't come to us. That was what I told myself. Then one evening, my aunt came to visit. There was a movie that night, so after dinner my mother went to prepare snacks. My father went to clear the theater, and my brother ran out to play. My aunt didn't know the layout of our rooms yet, so she quietly asked my grandmother, "Is elder brother still sleeping in that room?" My grandmother said, "No, he moved downstairs." I was confused and asked, "Moved from which room?" Nobody moved. My grandmother quickly said my aunt had just mixed things up, and then she gave my aunt a look. The kind adults give when they want someone to stop talking. But my aunt didn't notice. The kitchen light was dim, and she was terribly nearsighted. So she continued, "You haven't seen that thing again, right? Some things are better believed than ignored." My grandmother's face changed at once. She said, "No more, no more," and hurried me away to do homework. That moment frightened me more than all the rumors, because suddenly, the stories weren't just stories. They had entered our family. Now, some people might say this isn't frightening, because I never personally saw anything. But when you live inside a place everyone whispers about, fear doesn't need to appear in front of you. It sits beside your bed. It waits at the stairwell. It follows the sound of every wooden creak. Years later, I entered university, and after my family finally left the cinema, I rarely went back. But one period from our time there stayed with me more deeply than the rest, because it was the first time I truly felt that maybe, one day, I would meet them myself. In daylight, I was brave. Teenagers are like that. At night, I was afraid of everything, but when the sun came up, ghosts seemed impossible. I even dared to enter the room where my father had once seen something. I saw nothing. Instead, I found old film slides, colored promotional slides, handmade slides my father had carved, and old theater equipment. To me, they were treasures. I took things apart, examined them, played with them, ruined more than I should have. Around that time, I also heard another story, this one from Chen Zhenbao, who worked with my father. By the late 1980s, traveling song and dance troupes were common. Some were official, some only pretended to be. One troupe came from Hubei and claimed to be from Wuhan. Their lineup was larger than usual, so my father advertised heavily. The tickets were expensive, much more expensive than movie tickets, so plenty of people tried to sneak in. Usually my father and Chen Zhenbao checked tickets, while Yan Ding-an handled the projector, and a man nicknamed Old Mao sold tickets. But for performances like that, the troupe sent their own guards too. Strong men, people who clearly knew how to handle trouble. That night, trouble came anyway. A small leader from the Green Dragon gang arrived with more than 10 followers. None of them had tickets. They tried to force their way in. The troupe's guards tried to reason with them at first, but the gang leader refused to back down. The show was about to start. The police officers who were supposed to keep order had already slipped inside to watch. So the gang beat the guards and stormed into the theater. Afterward, everything seemed calm. The show ended. The troupe left town. A few days later, one of the gang members disappeared. At first, nobody connected it to the cinema. Back then, people disappeared for all kinds of ugly reasons. Then, for several nights, after my father and Chen Zhenbao cleared the theater and switched off the stage power, they noticed a terrible smell. At first, they thought someone nearby was cleaning a toilet pit, but the smell grew worse. One day, before the audience entered, they went to turn on the lights. Chen Zhenbao thought he saw someone moving on the right side of the second floor, as if someone had sneaked in without paying. They switched on all the lights and went upstairs. The smell was much stronger there. It wasn't sewage. They followed it slowly until they reached the room on the far right side of the second floor. The same room where that grieving mother had hanged herself. Then they heard movement inside. Both men froze. The whole floor was wood. Every tiny sound seemed too loud. In the end, neither of them dared open the door. They went downstairs, pale-faced, and found several acquaintances waiting outside. With more people, courage finally gathered itself. They all went back upstairs. Everyone agreed the smell came from that room. Still, nobody wanted to open it. At last, one brave man kicked the door in. Inside was a corpse, already badly decomposed. Some people fainted. Some vomited right there. But the most terrified people were my father and Chen Zhenbao, because Chen Zhenbao had seen someone moving, and they had heard sounds. Could a dead man have made those sounds? Later, the case was solved. The corpse was the gang leader who had caused trouble that night. The beaten troupe members had followed him after the show, captured him, tied him up, and dumped him in that room. They hadn't meant to kill him. They only wanted him to suffer for a few days. They had made him swallow something, maybe to weaken him or keep him unconscious, then left him there. They didn't know the history of that room. They thought he would wake up eventually, shout for help, and be found. Instead, he died. The autopsy said it wasn't poison. There were no clear injuries either. His death was simply strange. People said his eyes were wide open when they found him, and his mouth was stretched open, as if his last moment had been pure terror. After hearing that story, I slept with the lights on for several nights. My brother and I shared a tiny room. There was barely enough space for a bed, a large desk, and a television sitting on top of it. The gap between the bed and desk could only fit one stool, but with a bright bulb burning overhead, that cramped little room felt safe. Eventually, fear faded again. Life always does that. It keeps moving, even when your heart wants to stay frozen in one place. Back then, I kept thinking, thank goodness we lived in the front building. Thank goodness we weren't in the rear stage building. But life has a cruel way of listening. What you pray will stay away often comes closer, and what you fear most sometimes learns the path to your door. Okay, so this started about a year ago. The first time anything happened, I was just lying in bed, texting a couple of friends. You know that strange feeling you get when it seems like someone is watching you, and without even thinking, you look up? That's what happened. I looked toward the corner of my room, and I saw a man standing there. But he didn't look like a normal man. He looked burned, like his whole body had been damaged somehow. At first, I tried to tell myself it was nothing. I thought maybe I'd been staring at my phone too long, and my eyes were just turning a pile of clothes or shadows into a person. But then he moved. He started crouching down, twisting himself backward, almost like he was lowering into a bridge. And as he did it, he seemed to shrink. At first he looked tall, maybe around 6 feet, but then he looked smaller. Not tiny exactly, but closer to the size of a child. Then he rushed toward my bed. It happened so fast. I panicked and turned my phone screen toward him, using the light from it, and he was just gone. I really thought that was going to be the only time something like that happened. I wanted it to be the only time. But lately, I've been seeing other things. There's a girl I keep noticing, or at least I think it's a girl. Sometimes I hear her laughing when I'm completely alone. And then there's this shadowy man. I'm almost positive he wears a boater hat. I didn't even know what that kind of hat was called at first. I had to search for a while because I know absolutely nothing about hats. But when I finally found the right one, I felt this weird little relief. Like, okay, at least I know what I'm seeing. Tonight, I was alone again. I actually felt pretty calm because it had been about 3 weeks since I'd seen or heard anything. I was sitting there sketching, just trying to relax when I heard it. A girl crying. At first, I tried not to react. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe it was outside. Maybe it was some weird sound from the building. But then I realized it was coming from behind the couch. I kept trying to talk myself out of being scared. I kept thinking, no, don't make this into something. Don't freak yourself out. But the crying kept going. So I put my sketch pad down and stood up. The second I did, it stopped. For a moment I thought maybe that was the end of it. But I was already done. I wasn't going to be the person in a horror movie who stays to investigate. I started getting ready to leave. I kept my eyes on the side of the couch where the sound had come from, while I reached around with my hand, trying to find my keys. When I finally felt them, I glanced down for barely a second. And that's when I heard her laugh. It came from the couch. I snapped my head back so fast, and I saw this shadow moving along it. It reminded me of those scenes in movies where something invisible walks through a room, but you can still see the way it disturbs the air or casts a shape across the wall. That's what it looked like. I have an L-shaped couch, and I was sitting near one end. The other side of it is where all of this was happening. The shadow moved along the back of the couch toward the corner, and then it lowered, almost like it was ducking down behind the armrest. And I just thought, absolutely not. I wasn't going to wait for whatever it was to come out fully, especially not in daylight. I'm scared enough when things happen in the dark, but seeing something like that when the room is bright? No, I couldn't do it. I ran straight to the door and didn't look back. I stayed outside for about an hour and a half before I finally got someone to go in with me and check the place. So yeah, I honestly don't know what's happening. I don't know if I'm losing it, or if there's something in my home, or if there's some explanation I'm just not seeing. I just really need someone to tell me what they think, because I don't know what to do anymore. So last night, my girlfriend Brianna and I decided to finally test out some of our new ghost hunting equipment. We've been wanting to check out Fort Lowell Park in Tucson for a while. It has a lot of history packed into it. It was once a U.S. Army post during the Apache Wars, and before that, the area had ties to Hohokam people going back more than 1,000 years. So walking into that place, you already feel like the ground has been carrying stories for a very long time. We brought our EMF readers and a spirit box with us. I had heard plenty of stories about Fort Lowell before. People talk about seeing old soldier figures, hearing horses, even catching the sounds of equipment or movement near the old hospital ruins. And honestly, with all the history there, I was expecting the atmosphere to feel heavier than it did. We got there a little after 8 p.m. The park was still open, and there were people around. A few visitors, some dog walkers, that kind of thing. So it didn't feel quite as eerie as I was hoping. We walked through most of the park, taking our time. Every now and then, the EMF reader would spike fast from green to red, but it would vanish almost immediately. Just a quick little flash, like something tapping the glass and then disappearing. At one point, we were standing out in the middle of what's now a baseball field, and the reader moved up to yellow. That gave us a little hope, because we were away from obvious electrical sources. But we couldn't get much more than that. We tried the spirit box, but it was mostly useless. The radio stations kept bleeding through so badly that instead of white noise, it just became frustrating. We stood there listening, hoping for something clear, but nothing really came through. After a while, we decided to leave Fort Lowell and head downtown. We ended up near 6th Avenue and came across some older, abandoned buildings. One of them was connected to the St. Augustine Cathedral area, an old religious education building. The cathedral itself is a major historic landmark in Tucson, so the whole area already had this quiet, watchful feeling to it. We walked around taking pictures and looking for any safe way to see more of the building. We stayed outside, moving slowly, trying to avoid power boxes or anything that could mess with the EMF readings. Even then, the reader started jumping from green to yellow to red. The real moment happened near the steps. We were standing at the foot of the building, asking simple questions, and the EMF reader went to yellow. At first, I thought it was just another random spike, but then it started reacting in a way that felt timed with what we were asking. The spirit box still wasn't giving us anything useful, but the EMF reader kept moving, almost like something was using the colors to answer. We asked whatever was there to show us it was present. That's when the reader jumped to red. Right after that, the temperature dropped. Not dramatically like in a movie, but enough that both of us noticed. Then we heard these faint sounds bouncing off the wall nearby. I couldn't make out words. It was more like muffled movement or voices just out of reach. We kept talking. The EMF colors kept rising and falling. It felt strangely interactive, almost like whatever was there didn't mind us being around. At one point, it seemed like it didn't want us to leave. We stayed there for over an hour and a half. Eventually, the responses got weaker. The reader stopped reacting as much, so we said goodbye respectfully and left. Now, after some of my past experiences, I really wanted this one to feel authentic. Brianna was excited, and seeing her reaction honestly made me feel better about what had happened. But I still had doubts. I wanted something stronger, something I couldn't explain away. And that's where the night got strange. We went home and went to bed. Sometime during the night, I woke up to the sound of something hitting the kitchen counter, like a small object being dropped or knocked over. Our cat was asleep at the foot of the bed, so I knew it wasn't her. I tried to ignore it and eventually fell back asleep. Later, Brianna got up to use the bathroom. I remember being aware of it, but I didn't fully wake up. Then, sometime after that, I heard footsteps near our bed. Clear footsteps. Not a creak, not the house settling, not the cat. It sounded like someone walking right beside us. The sound was so distinct that this cold feeling went through my whole body. I looked over, and Brianna was asleep. That scared me more than I want to admit. I said a quick prayer under my breath and tried to calm myself down enough to sleep again. Later in the night, The room felt unusually cold. That stood out to me because I usually run warm. I'm not the kind of person who gets cold easily, and I almost never need a jacket. But this was different. It felt uncomfortable, like the air had shifted. When I woke up the next morning, I felt awful. Not sick exactly, more like I had slept with one eye open all night. Like my body had been resting, but my mind had been on guard the whole time. I told Brianna what happened, but she hadn't experienced anything like that. About an hour later, I suddenly felt like I needed a nap, which is not normal for me. When I fell asleep, I had a dream, and in that dream, a name came through very clearly. Ronnie. In the dream, Brianna was talking to him. I saw him in a picture, but I wasn't actually speaking to him face to face. It was more like I was being shown who he was. When I woke up, I asked Brianna if she knew anyone named Ronnie or Ronald. She said no. So now I keep turning it over in my head. Maybe Ronnie was connected to whoever we were communicating with at that abandoned religious education building. Maybe something followed us home. Maybe my brain stitched the whole thing together because I wanted an answer so badly. I don't know. That's the part I'm stuck on. Was this something real trying to make itself known? Or was my mind just running wild after a long night of searching in dark places? So, this happened in the old art building on campus, back when it was still standing. And when I say old, I mean old. The place was almost a century old and had originally been built as a gymnasium before someone, at some point, decided to chop it up into studios, classrooms, storage rooms, and whatever else they could squeeze into the bones of it. The layout made no sense. To get from one side of the building to the side with the working bathroom, you either had to go up a flight of stairs, cross through the second floor, then come back down another set of stairs, or you had to go outside and walk around the building. Neither option felt especially dignified at midnight. The whole place creaked and groaned constantly. Studio doors scraped across concrete. Some doors were held shut with chains and padlocks. The metal stairs had this one uneven step where metal turned into concrete, and I swear everyone tripped on it at least once. The lockers were these old, rattling metal things that sounded angry every time someone lifted the latch. People joked that the building was haunted, but not in a serious way. There were no big legends attached to it. The dorm across the street had the usual girl in white ghost story, but the art building was mostly known for leaks, dust, bad lighting, and probably several safety violations wearing a trench coat. I never felt scared in there. Not because of ghosts anyway. Creepy people and falling ceiling tiles, sure. Ghosts, no. A few years later, the university tore the building down after a donor paid for a new one. So, if anything was haunting that old art building, it is now haunting a patch of weeds, dandelions, and mosquitoes. But this happened before all that. It was finals week, and I was working late in the ceramics studio. That was the only time I ever stayed that late, because finals turn everybody into a weird little raccoon with deadlines. I had been there all day. Earlier, the studio had been full of classes, other students, and people pretending they were not deeply behind on their projects. But by close to midnight, I was alone. I had my headphones half off my ears because I wanted to hear if someone came through doing light checks. That was sort of the unspoken rule. If you thought you were the last person in a space, you turned the lights off to save electricity. The switches were down a little hallway by the lockers, out of sight from the main room, and the tables made it annoying to get to them quickly. So I wanted to be able to yell, "Hey, I'm still in here," before getting plunged into darkness like some tragic clay goblin. The important thing is, I knew I was alone in that room. After maybe an hour, I had to use the bathroom. So I made the little pilgrimage to the newer addition, where the functional bathroom was. On the way, I passed the gallery and the sculpture studio. Their doors were locked and chained shut for the night. I went up the stairs, past the second-floor classrooms, down the annex stairs, used the bathroom, and came back the same ridiculous way. That trip gave me a good sense of the building. There were still a few people working in other rooms, based on the lights and the occasional noises. I was not alone in the building, which was honestly comforting. You needed an ID card to get in, but people are crafty, and I preferred the idea of a few witnesses nearby. When I got back to the ceramic studio, I worked alone for maybe another half hour. Then I heard footsteps. Not vague old building noises, not creaks, not pipes. Footsteps. They were that very specific dusty concrete sound, like soft-soled shoes scuffing across the floor. 4 steps maybe, slow enough to register, close enough to sound like someone had walked along one side of the room. My first thought was not ghost. My first thought was, who came in? So I called out. Nothing. I leaned back to look toward the locker hallway. No one. Then I checked the room. There was a senior area partly blocked off by metal shelving, so I walked around and looked there. I checked the glaze room, the tiny repurposed office closets, the odd little senior lounge tucked under the old vaulted ceiling space, and the hallway leading back toward the lobby. No one. I stepped into the lobby to see if someone was still making rounds. Still no one. No footsteps on the stairs. The gallery and sculpture studio were still chained shut, and the sculpture studio had one of those doors that screamed whenever it opened, so if someone had gone in or out, I would have heard it. I figured maybe whoever it was had quiet shoes and slipped upstairs, or maybe they left through the main entrance, even though that would have been weird because the parking lot was behind the building. So I looked toward the office area, lights off. Then I checked upstairs. No one. At that point, I was confused more than scared. It still felt like a person problem, not a ghost problem. But not knowing who else might be moving around near you in an almost empty building does put a little ice cube in the bloodstream. I went back to work, but I switched my music to play quietly from my phone speaker instead of putting my headphones back on. I wanted to hear what was happening around me. Maybe 30 minutes later, I heard one of the locker latches move. It rattled, scraped, and clicked. Exactly like someone had lifted the latch to open it. I went straight into the locker hallway, immediately. No one was there. All the lockers were closed. That hallway was one way in and one way out, so there was nowhere for anyone to slip past me. I looked into the lobby and up the stairs. Nothing. I went upstairs just in case, and the few people still in the building were buried in their projects. The annex door had not beeped open. Nobody was walking away. Nobody looked like they had just sprinted downstairs, lifted a locker latch, and vanished into the academic fog. There was just no sign of anyone having been near the first floor, let alone inside the ceramics studio. And the sounds were so specific. That is what still bothers me. The footsteps were not random settling. They were sequential. Scuff, 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 scuff. Moving in one direction. Not a scrape from something dragging in place. Not a pipe knocking. Not a door shifting. They sounded like shoes. And the locker latch was even worse, because I knew that sound. I had heard those lockers all the time. It was not the sound of metal falling or settling. It was the sound of someone lifting the handle, engaging the mechanism, and getting ready to open the door. Nothing before it, nothing after it. Just that deliberate little clank in the hallway. I was not terrified. I am still not terrified when I think about it. But it is the one experience I have never been able to explain. I have been in old houses that creak and tap and slam doors. I can usually talk myself through it. Wind, HVAC, trees, animals, pipes, a house shifting in the temperature. There is almost always some boring, practical explanation waiting around with a clipboard. But this? I do not know. Maybe it was some kind of echo from another part of the building. Maybe it was the building settling in a way that perfectly imitated a person walking and then opening a locker. Maybe some impossibly quiet person was playing the world's least impressive prank. Or maybe, just maybe, I experienced a haunting. A very boring haunting, honestly. No dramatic apparition, no whispered name, no face in the window. Just footsteps, a locker latch, and the feeling that someone had come into the room, looked around, and left. That is my only real ghost story, and as strange as it sounds, I think something was there. Back when I was in middle school, I studied at this old, all-girls convent school, the kind of place where every hallway felt like it had rules baked into the walls. It was an English missionary school, very strict, very traditional, and honestly, a little intimidating even on normal days. The building itself was ancient, properly old. It had been around for more than 150 years, originally started by French nuns as an orphanage before it became this well-known school. And because it was that old, there were stories everywhere. There was a chapel inside the campus with old tombstones near it. Some of the nuns from way back were supposedly buried there. People whispered about deaths, strange incidents, and things that had happened long before any of us were born. Nobody ever confirmed anything, of course. Adults never did. But students always knew. The creepiest place on campus was this huge 4-story building we called the junior block, even though nobody really used it anymore. Years before, it had apparently been a hostel for girls. Then, sometime around the late 1960s, it was shut down permanently after a few awful incidents. After that, the school just left the whole building there. That was the strange part. Our school kept building new classrooms and expanding whenever they needed space, but that enormous building stayed empty. The rooms were massive, with high ceilings and dusty windows. Some doors were sealed shut. Others had old latches or rusted locks. We were told not to go inside unless a teacher allowed it, which, of course, made us even more curious. Then came our annual school concert. I was in the music group, and we needed a quiet room to practice. Every normal room was already taken by dancers, singers, or other performers, so our teacher finally gave us permission to use one room in that old building. We were excited, but there were rules. We could only use the assigned room. We had to tell a teacher before and after practice. We were not allowed to wander, and we had to return to class at least 15 minutes before dismissal. No excuses. There were 7 of us in the group, including me. For the first few days, we behaved. Mostly. But after a while, curiosity started tugging at us. Some days, after practice, we would sneak into the corridors and peek around. The whole place felt abandoned in a way that was hard to explain. Not just empty. Watched. One afternoon, we found a latched room on the 4th floor. It was not locked. That was enough for us. We opened it and went inside, expecting another dusty old classroom. But at the far end of the room, we saw something none of us expected. A staircase. A whole narrow staircase hidden inside the room, leading down into darkness. We knew we should have left right then. We really did. But 3 of us decided to go down, including me. 2 girls stayed near the top, and the others went back to the practice room to cover for us in case a teacher came looking. We only had one phone for light. The staircase was so narrow that 2 people could barely walk side by side. I remember the air getting colder as we went down. At first, we thought the stairs would lead to the ground floor, but they didn't. After a few minutes, the stairs stopped at this strange half level. There was almost nothing there. Just an old wooden chair, broken plaster, and bits of debris scattered near the walls. The smell was horrible. Damp, rotten, sour, like something had been trapped there for years. We could barely stand it. My friend Mira kept saying she saw something move along the wall. A shadow, she said. Not a person exactly, but something passing by where nothing should have been. We tried to laugh it off, but none of us were laughing properly. Then, on the way back up, it happened. One of my friends suddenly fell, and I don't mean she slipped. I don't mean she lost her balance in the usual way. She said something pushed her from the front. She went tumbling down the stairs so violently that for a second, none of us could even move. Then she screamed. It was the kind of scream that empties your chest. We rushed back down to get her, and that was when we saw the walls properly in the phone light. There were dark stains along the stairwell. They looked like old, dried blood. My friend was shaking so badly she could barely speak. Then she fainted. After that, everything became chaos. Teachers were called. We were scolded, questioned, and removed from the annual concert completely. But honestly, none of us cared anymore. We didn't want to go back into that building. Not for practice, not for anything. After summer break, we noticed the door to that room had been sealed and painted over, as if it had never opened in the first place. I don't know what was in that stairwell. I don't know what pushed my friend. I don't know why that room existed or why the school pretended the whole building was just an inconvenience. But all 7 of us remembered it. And even now, years later, the part that stays with me most is this: someone or something was down there with us. I remember the door being open. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Not the darkness, not the cold, not even the girl sitting inside with that calm little smile on her face. It was the door. It was wide open, pushed back against the wall like someone had left in a hurry and never found the courage to return. And inside that house, beneath the floorboards, Father Corin was still alive. That's the part that has stayed with me. Not that something had hurt him, not even that it had broken him. It was that whatever was inside that girl had broken him, then kept him breathing, kept him sitting down there in the dark with his eyes open and his prayers emptied out. Because a dead priest is only a body, but a living priest who can no longer believe? That is a warning. And I knew, the moment I stepped inside, that the warning was meant for me. My name is Father Alden. Before that night, I had performed 4 exorcisms. I had never failed. I traveled nearly 2 days through the October cold to reach that farmhouse, and by the time the road gave up, I had to walk the last stretch alone. The fields around the place were bare from harvest, and the wind moved over them like it had been waiting for someone specific. When I reached the house, there was 1 lamp burning in the front room. And there she was, 14 years old, dark hair, a small scar near her brow, just like the bishop's letter had described. She sat at the table with her hands folded in her lap, and she smiled at me. Before I could speak, before I could set my bag down, she looked straight at me and said, "He went below to find something I hid. Would you like to see what he found?" I should have turned around right then. I know that now. But I didn't. I went in. I sat across from her. I opened my book, and I asked her where Father Corin was. She glanced toward the back of the room, toward the cellar door, and then she looked back at me. "Praying," she said. "He has been praying for 6 days. The words are still there. It's only the faith behind them that's gone." She said it so gently. That was what made it worse. No shouting, no twisted voice, no rage. Just a child's mouth carrying something ancient and patient. I began the rite. She let me. That, more than anything, frightened me. In the other exorcisms, there had always been resistance, screaming, mockery, violence, some sign that the prayers had struck something. But this girl simply sat there. She watched me the way someone watches rain hit a window. The words filled the room and went nowhere. The lamp did not flicker. The walls did not tremble. She did not move. And beneath my own voice, beneath the Latin and the training and all the certainty I had built my life upon, one quiet question began to rise. Why isn't it afraid? I read for an hour. Then she said, almost kindly, "He's still down there. You can check on him if you like." I kept reading. She tilted her head a little. When he first came, he asked what I wanted. I told him the truth. I always tell the truth. It's the only thing I have that men like you are afraid of. I tried not to hear that. But some sentences don't pass through you. They lodge. After the second hour, I stopped. Not because I was tired. Not because my voice had failed. I stopped because the silence between the prayers had become louder than the prayers themselves. So I stood, took the lamp, and went to the cellar. The handle was iron, cold enough to sting. When I pulled the door open, a smell rose from below. It wasn't rot. It wasn't damp. It was something older than both, something the body understands before the mind can name it. I went down. Father Corin was sitting against the far wall with his knees drawn up. His hands were open beside him, as though he had been holding something precious for a long time and had finally let it fall. He was alive. His eyes were fixed on a water barrel in the corner. I said his name. Slowly, he looked at me. "Don't look in the water," he whispered. His voice was almost gone. "It shows you what you are, not what you pretend to be, not the story you tell yourself, what you are underneath all of it." He swallowed, and his eyes drifted back toward the barrel as if it were pulling him. "I looked," he said. "Then I tried to pray. The words were there, Alden. Every word. But the thing that made them more than words." He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. I understood. I went back upstairs and closed the cellar door. The girl was still waiting at the table. I sat down again. I found my place in the book. My thumb rested in the worn crease of the page, where it had rested so many times before. Then she whispered, "The barrel is behind you now." I said nothing. "You could look," she said. "You could know. Isn't not knowing worse?" I began to read again. My voice was steady. My hands did not shake. But something inside me had shifted. Not broken. Not yet. Just shifted. Like ice underfoot, beginning to remember it was water. She smiled. "Father Corin lasted 8 days before he looked," she said. "You may last longer. I think you will." Then she leaned forward, just a little. "But strength is only a longer road to the same door." I kept reading deep into the night. She waited. She had the cellar. She had the barrel. She had Father Corin breathing in the dark beneath us. And now she had planted a question in me. That was her real weapon. Not claws, not screams, not blasphemy. A question. A small, patient thing with roots. And I knew, even as I prayed, that once a question like that finds soil, it does not stop growing. Not in darkness, not in silence, not even inside a man who believed himself fortified.